The candle had burned down to a round hillock of wax that leaned like a melted tower over the lip of its brass dish, and in the little slope, where heat softened metal and wax together, a curl of soot had gathered, feather-black and delicate, as if some small night creature had come to roost inside the tower of the hand. Eddard Stark watched the wick gutter and steady, gutter again and turn thin as a hair, and the sound the candle made, soft, damp, almost a sigh, settled beside the scratch of his quill as if they belonged to the same hour, the same work. The night was long, and in its longness it seemed to him that the Red Keep had more stone than sense. It sweated by day, when the sun piled its weight upon the city, and it sweated by night with the heat of 1,000 kitchens and 1,000 bodies. Beyond the shutters, he could hear a late wind creeping over the Blackwater, having wrung itself empty on salt and tide. The gulls slept. The watchman's boots rang thin along the ramparts. Every now and again, somewhere distant in the city, a dog barked in its sleep and woke itself and barked again. Ned paused to flex the fingers of his right hand. Every knuckle answered him with a small ache, and he half thought of Winterfell, where the night would have been cold enough to numb the ache out of him and to sharpen his breath. He did not allow himself the full thought. The thought would become Catelyn's face, and then Robb's and the girls, and the way Bran had laughed once upon the crenels when the crows had scattered like thrown midnight from the pommel of his hand. He set the point of the quill again to the parchment and fixed his mind upon the words. Words were work, and work was duty, and the duty was to the realm. Let all true men of the realm know, he wrote in his dark, even hand, that by law and blood, the heir to Robert of the House Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, is Stannis of the House Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone. Let any man who would gainsay this present his proof to the face of the law. Let any man who would place another upon the Iron Throne be judged a traitor to his king and to the peace of the realm. He did not write bastardy. He did not write incest. He did not write the child's name. He did not have to. The law had its own ways of speaking plain, and some words ought not be inked unless they must. He had the book of lineages open on the table, weighty with leaves and the sweat of his thumb at the corners, and the names there were as they were, a long, slow river of begettings and befallings, honest as grain accounts. The seed is strong, Jon Arryn had said, and the words had followed Ned like a quiet bridge thrown over a dark place. If he wrote them in this letter, the realm would think him at war with a widow's children. He would not write them. He sanded the letter. He lifted it to the light, and worse than the heat of the candle was the heat in his chest. Robert's snores had been a broken thing when last he left the king's chamber. A harsh rattle followed by a gasp and a silence so full the nurses all leaned in to see if this was the last of him. There was no last of him then. Robert, who had been large enough to drown a whole hall in laughter, lay small in the bed, folded into himself around the boar's tusks lodged in what was left of his belly, and under all the sweat and sweet wine the king smelled like iron. Ned had kissed his brow as a man kisses a brother or the dead, and Robert's lips had moved, forming no words. The breath on Ned's cheek had been a child's breath. He set the letter aside and reached for the next. This one he would not blunt with generalities. This one was for Dragonstone, and for a man who might read more thoroughly than he cared to be flattered. Ned pulled a fresh parchment, and the quill's point found the first straight mark. To Stannis of the House Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone, he wrote. He did not write dear. He did not write friend. He wrote as if the law itself were writing. By the law you are your brother's heir. By the will of gods and men the peace of the realm stands upon the law. I have learned what Lord Jon Arryn learned. He died for it. I will not see the realm die as he did. King Robert lies grievously wounded. It is not for me to guess what hour the gods intend him, but the hour is soon. Before that hour brings the scramble of daggers and oaths, I declare you, by law and by right, king over the seven kingdoms. When you come as king, not claimant. I have set seal to notices to the lords of the realm. I will hold the city long enough for you to present yourself before the Iron Throne. If I am undone before you come, I am content to be undone for this truth. Eddard Stark, Hand of the King. He sealed it with the dire wolf, cool and grave in red wax. The ring made the wolf's head clean. He held it until the wax cooled. He listened as if the letter had a heart that might beat. When he rose, his knees complained. The night had gone wrong in the joints of the castle. All its hinges whispered. He crossed to the shutter and opened it a hand's breadth. A grayed smear of pre-dawn lay where the river widened to the bay. The air that reached in to him carried salt and a little of the city's smoke. Somewhere down past the kitchens a baker was throwing open a door. The smell of heat touched flour and made hunger in him he could not answer. He called for Tomard. The big man came rubbing his eyes, cloak thrown over his nightshirt, hair crushed on one side like a boy's. If Tomard had had courtly graces once, the South had burned them out of him. He took the letters as if he were taking spears. "Wake Vayan," Ned said. "Wake all who can be trusted, not the petty men in fine cloaks who smell of gold. The ones I named before. We take these to Maester Pycelle and to the Rookery. They fly at once to Dragonstone, Storm's End, Riverrun, the airy White Harbor Old Town, and copies to the Lords Paramount. I want them in the air before the city is fully awake." Tomard looked at the seals. "I am Lord." There was a carefulness in his voice. Tomard had spent enough years with him to hear the shape of a fall in a command. Ned closed the shutter and stood with his hand on the cool wood. The red keep leaned and did not fall. Outside the room, the castle's temper was waking. Servants with pails, the soft lilt of their speech, the clack of a bucket handle against stone, the thin first clink of armor being laid out. He would go to the king again to measure the breath, to be seen. He would go to the small council when the sun was up and place the letter upon the table like a blade. Littlefinger would smile the way a man smiles at the idea of a trap he did not set, and Pycelle would pull his beard as if it were a bell rope. Varys would float, plucking sorrow from the air. Renly. Ned left that name in the shadow of the shutter and went to wash his face in the basin where the water had gone to the room's heat. He pressed cold cloth to his eyes and thought that a man could go blind staring at a truth the realm did not want. When he came into the corridor, a shadow sprang from a garderobe doorway and walked beside him as if it had been waiting all its life to do so. Varys gathered his sleeves to his belly and inclined his head. "My Lord Hand is early to his rounds. The city will think itself flattered," the eunuch said. His voice was mild as milk. "The city will think what it is told," Ned said. "I think the city thinks what it eats," Varys murmured. "A bowl of rumors, a loaf of fear. Shall we season it with sense this morning?" His gaze fell to the letters in Tomard's arms, to the way the wax jewels on them caught the torchlight. He raised his brows as if they were small fish rising to bread. "Maester," Ned said, and Varys made a little show of placing a hand upon his breast. "I am not that kind of servant," Varys said gently, "but I attend upon the Maester as upon all the king's servants, and I have come to tell my lord a small thing. Renly Baratheon is awake at an hour he does not often know. He has been at Lord Baelish's door in the night and left it in haste with Ser Loras. The armorers are busy." "I thank you for the telling," Ned said. The knowledge sat like a second seal on the letters. He had expected as much. Renly was the sort of man who thought a crown a fit toy for a younger brother's hand if he could turn it in the sun and see himself there in the bright. "Go and listen to the kitchens," Ned said. "Tell me what they boil." "Words," Varys said, smiling. "Always words." He spread his soft hands. "And sometimes wine. Will my Lord Hand allow me a cook's advice? A dish served too early cools before it is eaten. A dish served late. Well, the dogs are happy either way. Send in a better cook," Ned said and walked on. He entered Robert's chambers by the door that faced the corridor to the September. The smell of blood and sweet wine hit him first, then the bitter of boiled herbs. The curtains around the bed were half drawn, a small court of shadows attending upon the king. The cauldrons of braziers were mute now but for coals that showed themselves in soft orange eyes. Between them, the nurses moved like shades. Pycelle had the look of a mastiff left by its master, his jowls down, his eyes wet with a grief that might not have known its object. When Ned came near the bed, Robert's chest heaved and settled. "Your Grace," Ned said. He leaned in. "I am here." Robert's mouth twitched. "Wine," he muttered, but it was the ghost of a jest. Ned lifted the cup and wet the king's lips. The wine ran out, made a little thread of purple to the cleft of his chin. "Your Grace," Pycelle intoned, lifting his hands in a motion that suggested both prayer and helplessness. "He wanders. The fever." "Leave us," Ned said. Pycelle hesitated, then bowed and drifted backward, gathering the nurses and the lads with the basins in with a tuck of his robe, like a tide shepherding leaves away. When the door settled, the sound of Robert's breath grew larger. Ned stood with his hand on the bedpost and watched the man who had once called him to war and to brotherhood. He had never thought that fraying a man back through this narrow place would feel like a kind of betrayal. Yet the letters in the corridor were already flying, or if not yet flying, the thought moved so swiftly ahead of action that it might as well be winged. "Forgive me," he said to the air between them. He had not meant to say it aloud. He did not know whether he wished Robert to hear it. Robert's eye opened the smallest measure. The old mischief was not there, only the pain, and behind the pain the bafflement of a man who had been accustomed to go through the world like a boar through brush and now found the thorn had him. He moved his hand. Ned took it. It was too hot and too dry at once. "Viserys," Robert whispered, and the name came out broken into pebbles. "Aye, bastards everywhere." Ned bowed his head. "Rest," he said. "I hunted it," Robert said. "Hunted day and night. Not the boar, the lie." His fingers tightened. There were bones under the heat. "Ned, you were always, you are a hard man, a breath. Hard is good. The realm needs hard." The words wandered. "Not for me, for them." A tiny laugh died in his throat. "Stannis is hard as stone. Bugger him. He'll make them eat dust and call it soup." His mouth tried to make a smile. "Good." Ned sat until the breath made a sound that frightened him and then eased. He sat until Pycelle returned with a look of long-suffering ready on his face. "My lord Hand," the Grand Maester murmured, as if calling him to a sermon. "We must guard against excitement." "Guard him against death first," Ned said. He took his leave as the first spear of sun found a slat in the shutters and made a little bright ladder along the far wall. By the time he entered the council chamber, the day had already begun to fill its own bowls, metal, and mouths, and the city's leaping rumor. Renly was not there. Littlefinger was, legs crossed, smiling as if he sat upon a field of daisies instead of a slab of council oak. Varys drifted in at Ned's shoulder with a sound like silk poured into a chest. Pycelle had brought a scroll large enough to serve as armor. "I have matters," Ned said without preamble. He placed the first of the general letters in the center of the table. The wax caught the light like a small wound. "This goes to the lords of the realm. Maester, you will see to copies, faithful to the last stroke." Pycelle's fingers unfolded the seal like a slow-winged moth. He read. His throat made a small working sound. When his eyes lifted to Ned, they had become careful. "This is strong fare, my lord Hand." "Strong men require strong fare," Ned said. "The law is not improved by chewing it until there is nothing left but pulp." "And what of the king?" Littlefinger asked, leaning his chair back onto two legs so that for an instant it seemed he balanced on a smile alone. "Has he died and I missed it?" "Ah, no, for if he had, we'd be deafened by bells and by the stamping of 1,000 horses, and the merchant counters would be busy on 9 streets of the city. And yet here we serve a dish named the King's Heir by the hand's own cook. Has the kitchen license been extended?" "The king is alive," Ned said. "He is also dying." He held Baelish's eye until the man lowered his own. "The law is not a trumpet to be blown only at funerals. It speaks while men are alive and while they die, and sometimes it orders how a dying man's words are to be understood." Varys's hands were together in a little temple. "Oh, how the law speaks," he murmured. And if there was mockery there, it was so buried in sweetness that only the roots of it showed. "The city will hear it as many different tongues. Some will hear it as a call to arms, others as Northman's wind. The queen, I think, will hear it as a jailer's footstep outside her door. Then she understands it, Ned said. And Renly? Littlefinger's voice went lighter, as if he were inviting a partner to a dance. He's a young man with immense weight of charm. He will hear that he has been passed over by law in favor of a brother who has always been less charming. Renly is the least of this, Ned said, though he did not believe it entirely. He would not feed the man's name to the room. Pycelle, send the letters, and one to Dragonstone with my personal seal. It is to go first. Pycelle nodded and began the ritual of rising. His breath came as if he had climbed a hill that was not yet there. When he was gone and the door had kissed itself shut, Littlefinger leaned in. I am only a small man who counts coin, my lord, he said. But even I understand that proclamations have force when they are held up by swords. How many swords do your words have? Enough, Ned said. Ah, Littlefinger said. The most flexible number. More than yours if you bend them the wrong way, Ned said. And to his surprise the words tasted not of threat but of frost and something cleaner. He had been too long at Southron politeness. I will have the city watch ready to keep order when the letters are read. The queen is to be watched. Not harmed, not spoken to, watched. Ser Barristan will be told that the king's heir is Stannis, and the Kingsguard will do as their vows require. Varys made a small sound that might have been approval or might have been a mouse. Oh, vows! How brave vows are in the mouth. When will the letters be read? Littlefinger asked, bored suddenly, toying with a dagger with 2 fingers as if it were a lady's fan. This afternoon? In the square by the great September, with the fat High Septon's blessing? Will the hand stand up above the people and read law to those who do not read? I would attend, my lord. I love a play. Ned shook his head. The Septon's blessing will come later. First the ravens, then the posts in the castle. The city will hear the realm speak, and the realm will hear the city answer. I am not staging a mummer's show, Peter. I am paving a road for a king to ride. And if the king does not ride it? Littlefinger asked. If he sails instead, because that is the wisest way to come to a city that may not welcome him? Then he will sail on a tide I have called, Ned said. And if he does not come at all, because fear or pride or some other silent wife keeps him at home? Varys asked, tilting his head. Then I will still have done what I swore to do, Ned said. I will have told the truth at the hour when the truth mattered. If the realm chooses a lie after that, let the realm answer for it. The council dissolved by degrees as all meetings of men did. Varys glided away to the kitchens of words. Littlefinger went, humming something courtly and light. Pycelle returned with pages to take the letters from him like wide-eyed squirrels. The sound of the city swelled at the windows, and when Ned stepped out into the day, it struck him that the heat was already laying its hand upon the stones. He felt sweat at the base of his neck and thought of Winterfell's chill water and the sound it made tightening in the heart of the well in the cold months. He went to the barracks of the city watch. Janos Slynt came to him with practiced deference and a smile too ready for the hour. It was the smile of a man who made his living out of knowing other men's days before they knew them. We'll keep order, Slynt said after Ned had given him the outline of what would be posted and where. We'll keep it like a maiden keeps her hopes. The lads are fond of their hand, and fond of their coin too. He laughed. A watchman's love is a two-faced coin. It flips as it must, but both sides are honest. You'll have your coin, Ned said. You will also have my patience if your men keep their hands from the knife and the cudgel unless they must. I want the queen watched. If she means to go to the sept, she may. If she means to go to the king's chambers, she may. If she means to send the royal children from the city, she may not. Slynt's eyes clicked brighter at that, like beads struck together. Ah, then I will be needing a small writ, my lord, with your seal, to show any fool who thinks a watchman's hand is rough on young gold lions. The queen's people have sharp tongues. I have found that parchment dulls them. You shall have it, Ned said, and when he took his leave he felt he had placed a thin plank across a chasm and was asking men with heavy armor to cross it one by one. By midday, the first of the proclamations found their boards. One went upon the post at the outer ward, another by the gate where merchants came and went, another upon the pillar near the steps to the Great September, another at the fish market where the flies rained. The letters flew, gray against the blue. Ned stood with Tomard in his own yard and watched the rookeries' mouths open, their hunger suddenly sanctified by the law's need. He felt every wing beat like a pulse at his temples. Word moves faster than ravens when men are hungry for it. By the time the sun slid 2 fingers west, there were knots of people in the streets, the knots pulsing as if fed by a heart beneath the stones. He sent Jory to the square to listen. The boy they called Cutjack came back instead, breathless. "They're arguing," he said, happy with his errand. "Some say Stannis never smiles, and that's the mark of a king. Some say he can't make a jest, and that's the mark of a priest." Some of the Goldcloaks jeered, and some kept their mouths tight. A fat baker said he'd rather a hard king than no bread. An old man said he remembered when Lord Stannis held Storm's End against the Stag's Eye. Nemes and ate rats like a rat but held. The Septon's acolytes looked like they'd swallowed sour milk. And there's a man with lion brooches handing coin for who shouts loudest that Joffrey is handsome. Ned almost smiled. "And what did you shout?" "I shouted that the hand knows the law," Cutjack said, and then looked sheepish. "No one handed me coin for that." "Eat at the kitchens," Ned said. And when the boy grinned and ran off, he felt the smallest warmth moving in him, something like the memory of a hearth. It died quickly enough when Varys came like a cloud across the sun. "The Queen," Varys said softly, "has commanded litters made ready for a ride to the September. Ser Jaime has made a point of polishing his son. I think it will shine in the streets today. She will show herself," Ned said. "Let the city see her face. Let them see the boy. The law will not shrink." "She is not a woman who shrinks," Varys said. His whisper tightened. "She is a woman who strikes." "Then let her strike at stone," Ned said, and went to find Ser Barristan. The old knight stood in the echo of the yard, watching 2 boys in white spar with blunted swords. He had the set face of a man who had long ago learned how to plant his feet under an oath and not move. When Ned came to him, the boys stopped and ran their eyes to their Lord Commander like birds watching the sky for danger. "Lord Stark," Ser Barristan said. He bowed a bow that was not for court but for men together under something larger than either of them. "You have news," Ned told him. He told him plainly. He did not dress the truth even in the skirts of courtesy. "By law, Stannis is the king's heir," he closed. "And unless the law has changed in the last hour without our knowing, my lord, I will not see a bastard child put upon the Iron Throne." Ser Barristan watched him for the space of 4 heartbeats. "The king's guard serves the king," he said. It was not a rebuke, only a laying down of a line that was already known. "And there is but one king at a time," Ned said. "The one in that bed is not the boy in whose name daggers are being sharpened. He may die this day. He may live too. It does not matter to what the law requires of us now. If the queen attempts to flee the city with the children, the king's guard will prevent it." "The king's guard will guard the king," Ser Barristan said. He looked not at Ned but at the ground a foot between them. "The law, Lord Stark, has always had 2 voices where kings are concerned. One is written, the other is the king himself. When the first contradicts the second, men of honor lose sleep." He raised his eyes. "I have not lost any yet. I am too old to start. If the queen attempts to remove the children, she will find that the men in white at her heels are not her brothers. I will hold the Red Keep with my life until the king speaks or until the gods do." It was more than Ned had hoped for and less than he needed. It would suffice. "I thank you," he said, and when Ser Barristan held his gaze, the old man's eyes were kind and terribly sad. He had thought the day was full. He had been wrong. When the Queen's litter took the street from the Tower of the Hand to the Great September, it did so like a curtain drawn by 2 hands, the City Watch and the King's Guard. Jaime Lannister rode to the right of the litter on a white horse that was too fine for usefulness, and the sunlight made his hair a thing that would have gotten him killed in the north, so easy a mark it was. Atop the litter's cushions, Cersei Lannister sat straight as if her spine were a scepter. Her hair was a gold banner, her face the kind of beauty that never let a man see what it looked like in a mirror. Joffrey rode behind her, slender and bright as a new blade and twice as untried. They passed beneath one of the proclamations. Cersei did not look up. The people did. Some jeered quietly, as people do who think the guards are close and the jail closer. A woman threw a small handful of barley, which rained like sound on the roof of the litter and did not stick. Joffrey laughed, foolish and pleased with the idea that all grains were hailstones aimed at other men's skulls. Jaime's mouth tugged at a grin he did not show. The King's Guard held perfect faces like polished shields. Ned watched from the steps of the Sept as the noble procession approached. He had set himself there not to be near the gods, but to be near the words he had nailed upon their house. Cersei's eyes found him before she found the parchment. He saw the intelligence in them go sharp and then flat, as if she had closed a shutter in a room of her heart. When at last she raised her gaze to the square of words, no more than a man's chest broad, cheap ink on cheaper vellum, she did not frown. She did not sneer. She looked at the proclamation with the same expression she might have given a fly that had wandered too near her wine cup and now lay drowned. "My Lord Hand," she said when she was close enough he did not have to imagine her voice. She did not give him courtesy, and the lack of it was an odd sort of courtesy all its own. At least it did not lie. "I see you have been at your letters. It is good to see a northern man writing instead of hunting. That's almost new." "The hunting is done," Ned said. "So must be the lying." She allowed herself the smallest twitch of a smile. "And you think this little posting scours truth clean? The city is full of postings. Men post for mummers, for debtors, for whores. They post for gods. They post for the price of eels. Now they will see the price of a Stark's pride." She flicked her eyes back to the parchment. "If my son is not heir, Lord Stark, then he is not my son. It is brave of you to make so much enemies in one sentence." "Your Grace," Ned said softly, "you know as well as I what Jon Arryn learned. The law will not be moved by the beauty of your children's hair. Take them from the city and you take them into open treason. Keep them in the city and the law will do what it must. The realm has had enough lies." She leaned from the litter, and the distance between them was made of braids and silk and guards and of something so hard no mail could turn it. "The realm," she said, "has had enough of other men calling themselves its father. It is my son's realm." She straightened. "Jaime." The Kingslayer's horse took one side step, close enough that its flank pressed the litter for a heartbeat. He did not speak. He did not need to. He had a sword. The sword was the whole sentence. Ser Barristan stood at Ned's left. He did not lean, and he did not place a hand upon his hilt. He said simply, to no one in particular, "Not today." Jaime's eyes went to him and back to Ned. He smiled then, a narrow thing. "Not today," he agreed. He turned his horse without a further word and the procession moved again. Joffrey looked back at Ned, his mouth forming a shape that men made when they wanted to spit and could not find their saliva. The bells of the Sept did not ring. Ned had not asked for them to ring. He had watched men being summoned to things they did not wish to be summoned to by bells and had no stomach for it. The proclamation's ink was brown and would go to yellow in the sun, and then to nothing. That was the way of ink. The words themselves might hold. When the shadows lengthened, Renly came to his door, not alone. Ser Loras Tyrell hovered behind him like a fine shadow. Renly had put on a traveling cloak over his summer green and his boots had dust on them, which at first looked like care but was only haste. "You have made a great noise for a northern man," Renly said without greeting, coming to the table as if he had been invited. "It is not yet a great deed." "There is still the deed of coming," Ned said. "Stannis will come." Renly made a face as if tasting a fruit not quite ripe. "Stannis will come when the last course is cold and call it fine fare because it was well made 3 hours ago. In the meantime the queen will have taken her child to the throne and placed his small sweet hand on its arm and claimed that the law is what a king says it is. and half the city will shout so loud that the other half will not be heard. And you will stand like a stone in a river and think that because the water must go around you, the river has lost. Go on, Ned said, because men like Renly talk themselves into their truths if permitted. Come with me, Renly said abruptly. Tonight. Now, we take the boy into custody, we set him aside, we make the queen a guest in her own rooms, we put the keys of the city in your hand and mine, and we send for Stannis to come if he wishes, to come as brother, to come as claimant, to come as he likes. If he is too slow, the realm will have got used to the feel of the chair without him. If he comes quickly, all the better. But this posting of yours? It is like lighting a candle to a storm. Ned shook his head. The offer was the same as the one Renly had made him the night before Robert came home from the hunt. The same dressed in a darker cloak. No, I will not seize children in the night. I will not make myself a thief of sons. There is law. There is victory, Renly said. His eyes were very green and very young. And victory makes law. You are not slow-witted, Stark. You are only stubborn. If you want a stag on that throne, then a stag must take it. Paper stag won't gore anyone. Paper stags burn. Go while you can, Ned said. Take your friends and go. If I fall the next sunrise, the city will take it out of anyone close to me. You will not be safe here. Renly's mouth tightened. He opened it to say something more, closed it again, and flicked a look toward Ser Loras that was love and consultation and fear all together. As you like, he said, but do not think I do not see where this road leads. He turned, cloak rising, and was gone with his Shadow Knight in his wake. By nightfall, word of Renly's flight had entered the city with the stealth of admitted fear. It was the sort of knowledge that went about with no one having to speak it. Ned sat with his men and ate bread that had gone hard and cheese that had gone soft. The day's heat lay over them like an extra cloak, and even the flagstones seemed to breathe. When he dismissed them, he went to the window and leaned his forehead there until it felt nearly cool. The moon rose, and the moon was a familiar thing that did not belong to any house or throne. Somewhere below, the city argued itself to sleep. He saw in his mind the ravens on the road to their destinations, their wings drumming in the night, the scrolls tied at their legs. He saw Stannis Baratheon standing in some granite room on an island of smoking stone, opening one of those letters by candlelight and reading it without moving any more than a man would move to regard his own hand. He saw the way Stannis's mouth would flatten, a lipless thing. He heard, for memory supplied its own wind, the waves hitting Dragonstone's black. He imagined Davos Seaworth in the background of that chamber, leaning slightly forward, half not daring. He imagined the woman who was said to be Stannis's wife, her face pinched with piety at even the idea of a royal summons. He imagined Shireen sleeping, marked as she was, untouched by these things, and had a pang for all small sleepers. The night did what nights do. It folded the day not into silence but into other talk. Ned woke twice. Once to a sound like a bucket dropped, and once to the murmured conversation of men he had sworn and paid. Both times his hand went for a sword that was where it had been set, and both times he eased because duty did not yet call for steel. When before dawn Tomard came with a face that had put aside sleep entirely, Ned was sitting already, boots in hand. Vayan has returned from the rookery, Tomard said. All flew, one to Dragonstone carried by a black with a scar along its right wing. The maester said that one flies truest on a headwind. I don't know what that means, but he said it was good. It is good, Ned said, and tasted it. Who watches the queen? Jory, Tomard said. Then the queen is watched. By mid-morning the city was a kettle with the lid rattling. The gold cloaks had assumed a bigness in the streets, their boots loud and their hands idle and visible. The poor watched them sidelong and kept their hands on their purses like prayer. The noble houses sent their lesser men out like ants to taste which way the sweetness lay. Words blew through the alleys, Stannis, 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 and then, answering them with the confidence of money and inheritance, another whisper, Joffrey, Joffrey, Joffrey. Men's tongues did what they had always done. They practiced treason in the noon and loyalty by supper.
Ned sent for Varys,
The eunuch came with the look of a cat that had put its paw upon something alive and meant to examine it indefinitely. "The queen has moved 4 chests to the Tower of the Hand," he said. "Inside them, gowns, a girl's toys, and hidden under the toys' coin. The boys' rooms are full of motion. Gossip says a prince must have a new cloak for his coronation, which is a lovely thing to say, as coronations have cloaks as bread has butter. But the word coronation is interesting. It means they mean to put him on the throne while his father still lives. It is a boldness. It is the sort of boldness that does not ask permission. The more reason to act in daylight," Ned said. "This afternoon by the sept, the High Septon will bless the posting." Varys pursed his lips. "Ah, you will mingle gods with law and make a braid. That will hold for some men. Not for all, but for some." He sighed as if saddened and delighted by his own news. "And there is another small thing. A galley left the palace docks at first light. No colors. No name. My little birds say it carries 2 women in cloaks and 1 small barrel that has a prince's scent. The gold cloaks let it pass with the respect that men show the rich. Jory is at the queen's wing," Varys said. "A watchman named Melos commanded the riverside post last night. Janos Slint's man. Melos is a man with a cousin in silk." Ned's stomach drew tight. "Send for Slint." Slint came oily with importance and did not bother to hide the new gold stitching at his cuff. "A galley?" he said with astonishment so studied it might have been carved. "At first light? The river is full of boats at first light. We cannot turn every one of them over like a fish." "You will turn over those I name," Ned said, his voice very even. "Of course," Slint said easily. "For the peace of the city, for the love of the hand. But what if, my lord, men begin to whisper that you mean to starve the queen and her children of air? It is a cruel thing to keep them penned. People love their royals to do as they will, as if any of us do." "You will watch the river," Ned said. "Anyone who leaves from the royal docks leaves with my writ, or they do not leave." "Of course," Slint said again. "Naturally. It is most natural." He bowed, and the bow had the depth of a penny. He had made an enemy of convenience a week earlier. He knew it. Now he felt the small itch that told him that enemy had grown a coat and would soon show teeth. Men like Janos Slint lived to be owned. The question was only which man had the deed of their purchase. Ned could not pay as the Lannisters paid. He could only pay in law. Near noon, a small thundering of feet announced Arya into the room. She had evaded Jane Poole again, and her hair was sweat-darkened and untidy. Syrio Farrell's lessons made her feet whisper even when they raced. "Father," she said, breathless and resentful and eager all at once. "Syrio says the city is full of men who think they know how to hold a sword and only know how to hold their own dicks. He says I am better than 5 of them. He says to watch their feet. He says much," Ned said, and for a moment the ice in him softened. "You are to stay in your rooms after your lessons. No wandering, no looking, no listening." "I always listen," Arya said, as if confessing a virtue. "Then listen to this," Ned said, crouching so the room shrank to their 2 faces. "The city is a trap and I am bait. Do you understand that?" Arya's eyes moved, dark and quick. "No," she said frankly. "It means men will be watching to see what I do," Ned said. "Some of those men would be happy to hurt my children to hurt me. You are a wolf. Wolves do not go nose first into snares." She nodded, solemn, and he almost believed the nod. Then came the smallest twitch at one corner of her mouth, and he knew that if she could press her ear to the keel of the city and hear the river thinking, she would. He kissed her brow and let her go. The High Septon's blessing came under a heat that made even the statues of the 7 look as if they were sweating under their crowns and helms. The fat holy man dabbed at his brow with a cloth as thick as a lord's tablecloth and lifted his hands. He spoke of law, which he liked because it kept men from laying their knives on his table uninvited. And he spoke of peace, which he loved because it rung bells, and he spoke in a voice oiled for public pieties. He did not say Stannis's name. He did not say the boy's name. He did not say the Queen's. He said the King's heir and the King's law, and that was enough. The crowd made more of it than his words did. Men always do. They filled in with their own names, their own hates and hopes. When Ned stepped back into the shade, Varys was there again, always where the air turned. "My little birds sing," he said, and when he smiled there was that sorrow again, or its mimicry. "They sing that Lady Catelyn has left the Eyrie, quietly, with only a handful. The moon door is closed, but the gate door is not. She has gone west, my lord. That is the way a river runs when it smells the sea." "Thank you," Ned said. The knowledge struck him deep and diffused. He pictured Catelyn riding under the high pale sky of the Vale, the air there like clear water. He felt at once strengthened and burdened, for love is always both. "And Stannis." "Ah," Varys said. "We must trust to crows yet a while." He cocked his head. "But my birds heard another thing, whispers in the yard of the Red Keep, whispers in the buttery. The Queen had words with Ser Barristan. She asked him if his sword was for the king or for the king's mother. He told her a sword knows its master, and she said a queen knows her men." Varys sighed. "Cats and birds do not agree in their philosophies." "Let them not agree," Ned said, "but let their claws remain in their sheaths." By evening, the heat broke not with rain but with the wind turning, as if a great man had rolled in his sleep and moved all the blankets of the air. The banners along the walls lifted and pointed east. Ned stood at a window and tasted it. It was salt, clearer now, and not laden with the city's stew of smells. He thought of the black raven with the scar along its wing and hoped it had found that wind. When the knock came, it was the sound of knuckles careful with flesh. Ned opened the door himself. Littlefinger stood with the look of a man who had rehearsed 3 jokes and abandoned them all. "Walk with me?" he asked. Ned did not trust his company, but he trusted his own feet, so he went. They took a slow path along the inner wall. Below, the gardens of the keep made a green shape in the dusk with frogs beginning. Above, the sky had set its first small diamonds. Littlefinger kept his hands behind his back as if he were a schoolboy waiting on punishment. "You have set things moving that cannot be easily stopped," he said. "You have made a play for the realm. It is a large board. It has many players you have not met. Some play with pieces you cannot see. You are one of those," Ned said. "Oh," Littlefinger said, surprised into honesty. "Yes." "Then what do you want?" Ned asked. "What I have always wanted," Littlefinger said lightly. "To see what happens next." He turned his head. "Take care around Janos Slint. He will take coin that is not yours, and he will call it duty. He will say he serves the city. The city pays many men. He will serve the man who pays longest." Ned was silent a moment. "You paid him once," he said. "Not only once," Littlefinger said, smiling like a knife. "Not only I." He spread his hands. "I am not your enemy, Lord Stark. Not today. You are your own. You insist on being a storybook man in a city that prefers stories with whips in them. It is charming. It is also dangerous. There is a reason mothers tell their children stories about wolves. It is not because wolves are safe. There is a reason wolves still live," Ned said, and left him. Night found the castle listless, as if even stones dozed when heat had worked upon them all day. Ned slept in parts, like a man reading a long scroll, waking between chapters. At the last waking, before even the kitchens had lit their fires, Tomard's hand shook him. "The king," Tomard said. "It may be the hour." By the time Ned reached Robert's chamber, the maids were at their knees, and Pycelle's jaw quivered in a way that made his beard a bush caught in wind. Ser Barristan stood at the foot of the bed, stillness itself, his hand upon the pommel of his sword as if it honestly comforted the king, though it was 12 feet distant from him. The king breathed with a sound like a door slowly opening and closing in a storm. Ned took his hand again. The heat was less. There was a frightening humility to that. Robert's eyes opened. "Ned," he said, more breath than sound. "Ned, I dreamed I was young." "You were," Ned said. His voice proved it could be gentle even in this castle. "Stannis," Robert said, and his eyes moved as if tracking something above them. "He will keep them in line. He'll keep them to the—" His mouth twisted. "Tell him to laugh. Once. For me." He shut his eyes and his chest moved and did not move.
Ned counted.
The second breath came miles later. When it did, it was so light that it might have been imagined. Pycelle made a throat sound. It was not a word. It was a small acceptance. Ser Barristan, whose face had been a page that read honor and nothing else for 40 years, closed his eyes and opened them, and there were waters in them that made his gaze more human and more terrible. Ned let go of the hand. He stepped away and felt that, in so doing, he stepped from one kind of world into another. He had the sense of a man who has been told many times that the sea exists and only now sees it. He looked to Ser Barristan. The old knight nodded. "We must go to the throne room," he said. "The law must be spoken." Ned thought, "I have already spoken it." He went not with relief but with purpose. As he crossed the yard, the bells began, great iron mouths waking to cry what they cry no matter the man. The city leaped to it as a dog leaps to a thrown stick, and though the hour was early, men poured from doorways and out of their sleep into the streets. The bells' voices came from the sept and from the castle and from lesser towers. They braided into a single long call. Janos Slint met him at the outer doors to the throne room with 2 ranks of gold cloaks that could have made a river between them if they had not been human. "My lord hand," Slint said, that penny bow again. "A moment. We do not have it," Ned said. "The realm must hear the law." "Of course," Slint said. He made a little motion and his men opened like a mouth. Ned passed between them and felt as a fish might feel being admired by a plate. The throne room was not full, but what it held was heavy. Lannister men in crimson with their lions open-jawed upon their chests. Men in white, men in black with the yellow cloth of the city. Courtiers who had missed no breakfast in their lives. The queen stood at the foot of the dais, Joffrey to her right and Tommen to her left, the little one flushed with pride, though he did not know his reason. Myrcella was not there. Ned's heart noted the absence and set it aside. On the throne itself a weight of iron waited, indifferent as winter. Ser Barristan spoke first. "Under the law, the hand of the king will." "The hand of the king," Cersei Lannister said, and her voice sliced the air as neat as a tailor's shears, "has made himself a crier in a marketplace. He has cried a lie, and now he would cry it to a hall." "Your Grace," Ned said, stepping forward. "By the laws of inheritance, by the law of my son's blood," she answered, and there was enough fury in the word blood to stain the floor. "You will not pass him over. You will not shame him. You will not pay some barren island lord in cold coin cut from my child." She lifted her head, and the green of her eyes seemed to bloom darker as if the very iris were a plant fed with rage. "Kneel, Lord Stark. Bend the knee to your king." Ned looked past her to the boy. Joffrey's chin jutted, and his eyes were bright with the kind of brightness that comes not from light but from flame finding tinder. He looked from Joffrey to the throne. He looked to Ser Barristan and found no escape there, only truth. He did not kneel. "By law," he said, and his voice made the word heavier than he had thought a mouth could make it. "The heir is Stannis Baratheon, and you shall not put a bastard upon the Iron Throne while I draw breath." The hall drew breath as if it were a single body and the air had become a blade. Jaime Lannister laughed, low and delighted. "There," he said to no one and to everyone. "There he is." Cersei made no sound, but her face changed. The beauty did not leave it. Beauty does not leave. It is a quality of light and bone, not of love or coldness. But something went hard in her and sent a signal to the men paid to read it. Janos Slint lifted a hand. The gold cloaks moved. Ned had expected it. He had not expected Ser Barristan to step forward at the same instant so that the two movements met like tides. Swords were not drawn. Not yet. Men placed themselves. Men looked at other men's hands. The throne watched all of them with its blank, many-eyed iron regard. "Hold," Ser Barristan said, and his voice could have stopped horses. In the king's hall, honor holds first. Lord Stark speaks the law. The queen speaks blood. Until the lords of the realm answer, we are keepers, not deciders. Hold. Cersei's nostrils flared. You are jailers in white, she said. Jailers made fancy by a tradition men fear to name treason. She looked to Slynt again. His hand hovered, uncertain. Ned raised his head and very deliberately, very slowly, set upon the first step of the dais a second parchment, smaller than the proclamations, thick with seal. He had kept this one back, not out of cunning, but because his hand had not liked the feel of it. Now it lay where every eye fell. Robert named me protector until his lawful heir takes the throne, he said. In the name of the king you loved, stand down. Loved, Cersei said, and laughed. It was a sound without any soft in it. Loved? Oh, we loved Robert as one loves a storm that drinks the day. She looked at the seal. You read the will to the advantage of your own northern righteousness. You put a word there the king did not. You have always been a better reader than you are a friend. Her eyes cut to the boy again. Joffrey, tell them. Joffrey lifted his chin. When he spoke, his voice broke and came together again, and the hall fed on that small weakness and loved him for it or loved to despise him for it according to their house and purse. I am the king, he said. I command the hand to kneel. Ned did not. He put one hand upon the hilt of his sword and the other upon the will. He did not draw. He did not need to draw to let the room see that he did not come here with his head bowed. He waited. It need not have happened as it did. It could have gone another 100 ways with slightly different men or slightly different weather. It happened as it happened because men were what they were and because words spoken in the morning must be answered by night. A commotion at the doors made the guards turn their heads. For a heartbeat, every weapon in the room was less a weapon and more a question. A breathless captain of the watch pushed into the hall, dragging with him a boy hardly big enough to drag. The boy's hair was a thatch and his cheek was dirt, the kind of city child who belonged to no one and everyone. My lord, the captain shouted. There's talk in the streets. There's talk. He caught sight of the queen and stammered. The boy pulled his hand free and blurted as if he were vomiting words before someone struck him. They put up a posting with the lion's face. It says the boy's not. He knew enough to choke on the next word. The hall exploded, not all the way into anything irrevocable, but into noise, into that sudden movement that is more dangerous than stillness. Janos Slynt's hand did what hands do when they have been hovering over the same shape too long. It decided. He brought it down. The gold cloak surged. Ned did what he had intended to do all day. He moved not back but forward. He placed his foot on the second step of the dais and raised his voice until it was the only thing that cut the noise. By law, the throne is for Stannis Baratheon. The words fell like stones into a pool, and the ripples that came from them were men making choices. Two of the gold cloaks nearest him hesitated, and that hesitation cost them the lead their fellows took. Ser Barristan's white cloak flared like a gull as he turned, not to cut but to bar, his sword out with that perfect economy that had made ballads before and would make them yet. Jaime's grin became a knife and his sword made a ring in the air as he loosed it from the scabbard. The queen did not move. Joffrey did, 2 steps back, the better to be seen by more men. A spear went sideways. A fist found a jaw. A knee found a belly. Men were not yet dying, which made the room more dangerous than death would have. Janos Slynt called, "Take the hand!" Tomard's shoulder hit a gold cloak like a door. Jory's blade did not leave its sheath, but his hand knew where every weak place in a man's body lay, and his elbow taught them a lesson. Ned took no sword stroke. He stood with one foot on the dais and one on the hall floor and held the will like a banner. From high on the throne, the sword points, the spearheads, the raised faces looked like the spines of a great beast beginning to bristle. The Iron Throne had seen worse. It waited. It had patience like a winter field. Into that moment fell a voice that did not belong to the room. It belonged to weather and to stone. It belonged to the kind of truth no posting could contain. "Make way!" it cried. Make way for the seal of the sea. Men do strange things for sound. They parted. They leaned. They made a lane they did not mean to. Through it came a man in a plain dark surcoat, salt-dried at the hem, his hair blown rough and his face cut by sun and wind. Behind him came 2 sailors in poor leather and rich scars. Between the 3 of them they bore a chest, not large and not ornamented, but heavy enough that their arms trembled. The man set it down at the foot of the dais without asking anyone's leave. He looked at Ned and bowed, very small and utterly sincere, as if he were bowing from a castle wall to the man who had made the wall stand. Davos Seaworth, he said, as if it were a word he used only to identify himself in case of a disaster. In service to Lord Stannis Baratheon. Lord Stannis, by this moment and by many King Stannis. He put a hand on the chest. By your letters, my lord hand, we came as soon as wind allowed with words for the realm. He laid upon the chest a bundle of parchments wrapped in oilskin. He cut it with a knife that had once been a smuggler's pride and had since been washed in knighthood. The scrolls shone with seals that did not glow and were not large, but there were many. The Storm Lords, Davos said to the room at large, to all the men whose mouths had been opened to shout something else. Fell and Buckler and Karen, Penrose and Swan, Selmy. He glanced at Ser Barristan, and the old knight did not blink. Errol, Grandison, Dondarrion, Estermont, and more. They declare by these that the lawful heir is Lord Stannis. They call him king. He lifted one scroll and read aloud the old words that had always meant the same thing no matter what mouth had said them. By the laws of gods and men and the line of Robert of House Baratheon, we do hold and proclaim. Cersei moved then. Her hand flicked toward Janos Slynt, and Slynt did not need this signal but welcomed it as a man welcomes a thing to justify what he already does. Seize them, he cried, and what had been a river turning became a river falling. Ned's men closed around him, not rough, not gentle. Ser Barristan stepped between Jaime Lannister and the dais, and for the first time steel struck steel. It was not a long music. It was short and hard and beautiful, and no one looking at the old man would have said the years had touched more than his hair. Jaime's blade rang against the smooth, unfussy economy of Ser Barristan's defense, and for a moment the hall saw what it had read about and forgotten. Jaime laughed because he knew beauty when he met it and preferred to meet it sword first. Davos had put himself before the chest as if his body were a kind of seal. A gold cloak came at him with a club and got an elbow in the throat for his trouble. Davos moved like a man who had learned to survive in narrow places and did not fancy dying in wide ones. The sailors went down under more clubs, their faces surprised to find that the Hall of Kings was only another dock with better banners. Enough!
Ned roared.
He did not have the command of the bells. He had only the command of his own voice, and he spent it all. Enough! In the name of King Robert and of the realm. The doors crashed open again, and the man who came through them made the hall's noise fall not because he was loud, but because men always quiet to watch a blade they have not seen drawn. He wore no crown and no robe. He wore a plain cuirass and a sword more plain than Jaime's, but the way he wore them was thrown enough. Stannis Baratheon's face was a map of disapproval upon which no river of compromise had ever been drawn. The travel had made him leaner. The sea had whitened him a little along the temple. His mouth was what it had always been, thin as law. He had not come alone. Behind him fanned men in the plain colors of stone islands and storm coasts, men whose boots were not quite dry. They did not fill the hall. They did not need to. They brought with them an air that was like the hour before a storm. The room felt it and remembered that it had windows. The queen's eyes went wide for a heartbeat and then narrowed as if she had found in this turn not a blow but an opportunity. Jaime's grin grew wider. Ser Barristan lowered his sword as if to say, "Finally, someone who will not pretend." Stannis did not look at any of them first. He looked at Ned Stark. "You are earlier than a rumor," he said, and the words might have been gratitude or the only benediction Stannis Baratheon was capable of. "You make law while others make excuses."
Ned bowed.
It was not a courtly bow. It was a soldier's acceptance. "Your Grace," he said, and the sound of the title laid itself on the stones of the throne room and found places there to root. Joffrey made a sound that no boy should make and many kings do. "I am the king," he shouted, and his voice cracked again, and this time no one loved him for it. "Guards, hold," Ser Barristan said for the third time, and men who had never obeyed him then. Stannis walked the length of the hall between the parted ranks, his eyes flicking now to Cersei, now to Jaime, now to Janos Slynt, measuring. He mounted the first step of the dais and looked upon the iron throne. He looked as a carpenter looks at a chair that has sat too long in the rain. He did not sit. He turned to face the hall. "By law and by right," he said, and his voice was not big but it carried. "I am king. Robert is dead. We will not argue grief here. We will not argue beauty or blood or love. We will argue law, and we will do it quickly. For the city is a tinder basket and the realm is a forest." His gaze fell upon Cersei. "You have kept your son close to the throne, my lady. Keep him closer to your prayers. He will need them." Cersei smiled. It was not a woman's smile. It was a blade turned so that it caught the light. "You will not last a week," she said softly. "Even kings need friends, and you have fewer than any I have ever met." "I have the law," Stannis said, "and if the gods favor any justice at all, I have them." He turned to the hall. "Lord Stark spoke what had to be spoken. He has my protection." Then the room found its true shape. Men who had been waiting to spend their loyalty spent it either hot or cold. Janos Slynt did not move to seize the hand again. He moved to measure. He measured in an instant and did not like what he saw. It was the instant of a rat considering a new hole. Jaime Lannister slid his sword home with a grace that was almost a shrug. He had the look of a man enjoying the game more now that it had become more difficult. Cersei looked up at the throne as if she were considering whether it would be possible to burn it with a candle held under each bar. Ned stood very still and felt inside him something that had been stretched return to itself, not relaxed but set to the tension he had meant it to have. He had declared a king and the king had come. The law had not yet won. The law rarely wins, it only endures. But the choice had been made in the only way that mattered, in the open. The hall emptied not in noise but in a different kind of talk. Orders, not rumors. Men went where they were sent. Stannis named no hand, not yet. He named no small council. He only named guard posts and gates and the care of the king's body. He did not look to the small folk here. They would be addressed in the square. He did not look to the high septon. That blessing would be taken or not according to the man's temper and the weight of his purse. He looked to the harbor and to the walls, to the kitchens and to the ledger. He looked like a man who has been handed an axe when the tree is already half felled and has no time for poetry of the wood. Later, when the day rolled on its wheel and the city felt the new weight upon it, Ned sat in his chamber and did not do the one thing that would have succored him. He did not sleep. He sent Jory for Arya and for Sansa. He sat with them and told them, in words small enough for children, that a king had died and a king had been declared and that they would be careful and obedient. Sansa wept in the pretty way she had learned from ladies. Arya sat with her back straight and her eyes everywhere at once, as if memorizing the lines of the room so that she could draw them later and step through the drawing. "Will we go home now?" she asked at last. "Soon," Ned said, and meant it not as a softness but as a plan. Not today, but soon. When the girls were taken back to their rooms, he went to the window again. The wind had turned. The sea's smell came bigger. Far out on the bay, sails moved like small teeth. In the yard below, men were erecting a platform. He watched them place the beams with the care men show wood that will be asked to bear. Witness to the day. There would be more days. There would be nights full of knives and mornings full of crows. There would be letters blacked with soot where fire had licked them, and courts with their masks set carefully on. There would be a brother in the south who called himself a son and would not see his shadow, and there would be a proud girl in a pale city across a different sea whose name men had begun to whisper again because the world never runs out of old stories to tell at new tables. There would be winter coming down the world's middle like a slow, remorseless king that would not sit any throne men built. But for this one long day in this long room in this long city, Ned had done what he had sworn he would do. He had put law where men could see it. If it broke, it would break where men could see it. He could live with that. He could die with that. He bowed his head and listened to the wind comb the banners and thought of a different wind through a different courtyard, and of a godswood that had no weirwood but knew enough to hold a man's prayer in the shape it deserved. Near sunset, Stannis came to him without herald or squires, crossing his own mind's distances as if they were rooms. He looked like a man made of salt and iron and long habit. "You did as a man ought," Stannis said, standing. He did not sit. "You did not delight me. That is another of your virtues." "I did not intend to," Ned said. "I will need men I do not like," Stannis said. "And men I do. I will need men who will speak law to me when I am tempted to speak otherwise. I will need men to hold in the dark." "Will you?" The question hung. Ned considered the next season of his days and found in them not comfort but clarity. "I will do my duty," he said. "Good," Stannis said. The word had no warmth, but it had weight. He turned, as if conversation were a door he could simply leave. At the threshold, he stopped. "I will not promise you that I will be a king you like. I will promise you I will be a king true to the law. I will not flatter the highborn. I will not fatten the poor with lies. When winter comes, I will have the realm ready for it in every way a realm can be readied."
Ned nodded.
"Then do not ask me for anything but the truth. I will ask you for your daughter's presence at court," Stannis said without turning. "Both of them, as hostages to honesty, as signs, as the making of the next realm." Ned's heart did a small act. He had expected as much and had hoped for less. He breathed. "We will speak of it," he said, and Stannis accepted that as a promise to be carved later with care. When the king had gone, the room felt larger, as if he had removed a weight and left the vessel of the air lighter by so much iron. Ned went to the table and found his quill again. The candle had been trimmed. The dish had been cleaned. He set the nib to parchment and began another letter to Winterfell, and this time he wrote it all, not the law, but the feeling of the day, the heat and the bells, the queen's eyes and the old knight's blade catching the light, the way a smuggler had spoken truth better than any lord, the sound of men choosing. He wrote so that Catelyn would hear it in his hand when she opened it and know what kind of city he stood in and what kind of road waited for them now. The dusk went thick. The first star came and then its brother. Somewhere in the city, the frogs in the gardens began their evening talk again, as if nothing had happened, as if kings were to them what storms are to stones. Something to sing after. Ned's quill made its dry music. He signed his name. He sealed the letter with the direwolf. He held the wax until it cooled. Outside, the wind shifted once more, and men on the wall turned their faces toward it and breathed. Far off, from Dragonstone or from the Stormlands, or from the unknown bellies of the gods, a storm considered the land and made up its mind. Night had a way of putting edges on the Red Keep, as if the moon had slipped a whetstone along every merlin and made the place a kind of blade laid upon the city's throat. The banners stirred like sleeping beasts, and sometimes the wind caught a fold of cloth and made the lion or the stag or the seven-pointed star look as if it had blinked. Ned stood with the sealed letter to Winterfell in his hand until the wax had cooled entirely. Something in him wanted the act to be complete before he let it go, and then he called for a runner he trusted and gave it into the boys, keeping with the quiet gravity old northern men gave to the binding of a man's hand before he fought. He slept a short time and woke with a clear head that surprised him. It was as if the city had found a second air in the night and posted it through the rooms like a watchbill. Stannis Baratheon had come not with songs, not with flowers, but like weather, and the castle had made a new shape around his weight while men slept. The dawn showed itself in strips, ink and milk across the shutters. Ned washed, dressed, and by the time he stepped into the corridor Tomard was waiting, already armored. "The king has called a council," Tomard said carefully, as if the words themselves might catch. It was the first time he had used that title here without the name Robert. Ned nodded and went. As he crossed the galleries, he passed windows that gave him quick slices of the inner wards and the sky beyond. The light coming off the bay had a whiteness to it the day before had not held, and gulls traced it with their bodies as children trace letters, swinging in slow prints. From the kitchens a smell like onions and damp wood rose, and he thought how in Winterfell even the kitchens had a different breath to them, winter-fat, smoke-deep, round. The small council chamber had changed since yesterday in no visible way. The same heavy table, the same carved tall chairs, the same map along the far wall whose rivers were not wet and whose mountains never grew smaller. Stannis was there, standing at the window with his hands behind his back, looking not at the map but at the actual city beyond it. Davos Seaworth stood near the door in the posture of a man who thinks he has mistaken the room and will leave quietly if asked, but has no intention of going unless he is asked. Ser Barristan kept to the far side, a white piece at the edge of the board. Varys drifted to a corner where shadow gathered even in morning. Pycelle was present with a sheaf of scrolls he almost certainly had not needed to bring. Littlefinger sat as if he were his own guest, a man well pleased with the entertainment he had found for himself. Stannis turned, and the room tightened a little. He seldom smiled, men said, and they were right. His face seemed made for verdicts. "We begin," he said, as if the word had been stitched onto the hem of the morning. "Lord Stark, you will sit." Ned took the chair he had taken before under another king, and the sense of disloyalty did not come. He had already given Robert his last service in the only coin that mattered, the coin of truth. He had it in him to go on. "We will hold the city," Stannis said without any prelude. "The Lannisters will test us from within and without. They will turn men who are less men than money, and they will march with men who are more horses than sense." His mouth flattened further for an instant, which seemed a physical impossibility until one saw it done. "I will have order. We begin with the gates, the harbor, the watch, and the coin. The hardest of the four is coin," Littlefinger purred, balancing a dagger across his knuckles and letting it roll as if it were a boy's trick. "Though I am comforted to learn the king does not count the small folk among the four. They are cheaper than coin and heavier than gates." Stannis did not look at him. "Your office will continue, for the present." His eyes went to Ned. "You have the city watch in hand?" "I have its commander in hand," Ned said. "It is not the same thing." "Janos Slynt," Stannis said. If the name had a taste to him, he did not show it. "He is a bought man. Who would you put in his place?" "Jacelyn Bywater," Ned said at once. "A captain among the watchmen. Old service, not old purse. He has lost a hand and put iron in its place. He knows the feel of weight and the balance of it. He will not fancy me, but he will fancy order." Stannis nodded once. "Bring him." He fixed Davos with a glance that was almost permission to move. Davos dipped his head and left with his seaman's swiftness. Varys watched him go with an expression that managed to be both bland and interested, like a cat watching a closed cupboard. "Ser Barristan," Stannis said, "you will place 2 of your white cloaks at Maegor's holdfast. They will guard the queen and her sons." "They will guard the king," Cersei said, stepping in without the excuse of a knock, silk whispering at the sill of the door. Jaime came behind her as much as a shadow comes behind a flame. The queen had not put her hair up. It lay about her shoulders like a banner that had chosen to become a woman. "You have not yet been crowned, Lord Stannis. The props are not in place for your play." Stannis's gaze moved to her and then past her to Jaime as a surveyor's plumb moves past stone to find gravity again. "You have 2 choices," he said. "You may stay as a lady honors her marriage by staying where she wed, or you may be made to stay. Either way, you will not leave the Red Keep with the children. The realm requires they be near the law while the law is spoken." "Your law," Cersei said, "and your men, and your weather, your everything." The smile she gave him was a dark window. One could stand at it and see only oneself reflected, if one did not look too long. "I have sent for my father." "The law has already sent for him," Stannis said. "He will answer to it." Jaime's laughter was pleasant, as if he were amused by friends around a fire. "The law does not have hands," he said. "My father does." "Then let him lay them on the scales," Stannis said without heat.
"Ser Barristan,"
The King's Guard will do their duty, Ser Barristan said. He did not look at Jaime when he said it. That was kindness or something like it. Cersei's gaze slid to Ned, and for an instant, only that, there was something like respect in it, or at least an acknowledgement that he had been the stone that had not moved. You might have reached for a crown of your own, she said softly where the room could hear and pretend it did not. Men would have forgiven you for it in the end. They forgive wolves for being wolves. Instead, you have put a hard, humorless man on a seat made of knives. You will all bleed, and the realm will call it justice. She turned. Come, brother. Let us watch them make law as men make fences in a wind. Busy, and very proud until the wind changes. When they were gone, the room felt like an old wound someone had prodded to see if it still hurt. It did. Stannis stood very still until the door stopped, remembering they had passed through it, and then lifted a hand, not to rub at his brow, but to place his fingers on the windowsill as if measuring the day's weight. Grand Maester, he said without looking, send a raven to Old Town. You will request that the conclave consider the present circumstances and supply the crown with a Grand Maester whose diligence does not flag with age. Pycelle's mouth opened and closed twice, a fish eating air. Your Grace, he said at last. The chains, one does not. He found dignity the way a man finds his hat after a gust has taken it. I serve. I have always served. You will be permitted to serve, Stannis said. But I have heard enough of the counsel you offered to Aerys at his last, and of the counsel you offered to Robert at his first. The one opened gates to lions. The other lulled a man who should have listened to wolves. He turned. You will keep to your duties and not go further unless called. Pycelle bowed so low his beard dusted the floor. They spoke then of gates and the men who held them. Stannis' skill lay not in making men love the work, but in making them do it, which is a different skill and one that lasts longer. He took the watch roster as if it were a tally of debts. He ordered the river to be patrolled by boats under command of men who had bled on river water before, not lords' sons out for the story. He placed Davos at the harbor with a word. No ship out without writ, none in without question. Davos accepted the charge as a man accepts a coat given him when the weather turns. Littlefinger, Stannis said then, turning upon the master of coin not with anger but with the exactitude of a man measuring a beam's true length. You will find the coin to pay the watch and the garrison 3 months in advance. If you must frighten bankers, frighten them. If you must sell trinkets, sell the more costly trinkets first. Littlefinger smiled, though his eyes altered not at all. The crown jewels? He asked pleasantly. They are more the crowns than they have ever been. They will not like it. Nor will I, Stannis said, find other trinkets, but find them. Other trinkets are other men's castles, Littlefinger said. Other men's armies, other men's wives. Can be done. It is always done. It just hurts. Men are very brave about other men's pain. Find coin, Stannis repeated, and that was the end of that. When Jacelyn Bywater came, he came as if he had been told to walk into a fire and had decided to walk correctly. He was a tall man gone gaunt where other men's obligation had made them soft. The steel hand he wore was plain and dull and serviceable, like a pot in a poor kitchen. He bowed a bow that was as deep as it needed to be and no deeper. You're to replace Slynt, Stannis told him with neither flourish nor comfort. You will hold your men to their oath and to mine. If you take coin from any purse but mine or the hands, I will take more than your hand from you. If you keep order, you will sleep so soundly that a man with no conscience would envy you. Bywater was long quiet. When he spoke, his voice surprised Ned by being mild. Slynt has friends among the captains, he said. Not many, but 2 are enough to turn the taste of the whole stew. Name them, Stannis said. Bywater did. Stannis listened and made a small gesture to Varys, who accepted the names as if accepting a gift he had already taken. Remove them, Stannis said. Before you remove Slynt? Ned asked. While he watches, Stannis said. Then remove him. He did not smile, but for a heartbeat there was the ghost of satisfaction that comes to a craftsman when a joint sits true at last. Do it today, quietly, and with papers that cannot be misread by men who cannot read. Bywater nodded. It will be done. He hesitated. Your Grace, there is talk among the cloaks. There is always talk. The word bastard is being used as if it were a throwing stone. The word queen is being used as if it were a curse. The word king is being used as if it were something men could be by shouting it. Men like the taste of new words. It makes them feel clever. Stannis's mouth took the shape of a man who had bitten the pit of a fruit. Men may talk, he said. Men may shout. Men may not break the peace. If they break it, break them. Bywater bowed and left. Varys's little hands drew together in a silent clap of appreciation for the neatness of it all. Your Grace, he said after a small long moment. A small piece of news delicate as pastry. A single galley slipped from the royal docks before dawn yesterday. I told Lord Stark this. I will add now that my birds say the galley put in at a fishing pier upriver, where a smaller boat took on a cask of sugar said to be heavy, and that later a boy, hair roughly cut, was seen to scratch at the sugar with a soft hand, and that the sugar at the place of scratching was rubbed clean of dust. Myrcella, Ned said. The thought was quiet and cold. The girl's absence had been a gap the eye could not help but try to fill. Stannis looked at Varys. Can you take her back? I can try, Varys said. Trying has its own risks. We might catch the cask. We might catch the boy. We might frighten 3 fishermen and come away with a sack of stale oranges and a story that says we are thieves of sweets. Try, Stannis said. Do not stir the river so hard the fish all flee. They broke then, to go and make true what words they had laid. On his way to the yard Ned met Ser Barristan again, and for a moment they fell into step as easily as men who have fought on the same field and do not need to speak of it in order to share it. The boy, Ser Barristan asked without turning his head. Gone from the keep, Ned said. Perhaps not far. We will place men to keep these, Ser Barristan said in the same tone, and Ned knew he meant Joffrey and Tommen. The queen demanded I swear to her honor for their safety. I swore to the crown for it instead. She did not like the taste. She likes no taste she did not put in her own mouth, Ned said. Ser Barristan's mouth twitched. I have served too many kings to mistake this for the easiest kind, he said. He glanced up. I do not think Stannis will reward my flattery with song and wine. He will not, Ned said, but he will reward your oath with respect, and I think you have lived long on that. I have, Ser Barristan said, and they parted with that. At the harbor Davos Seaworth went about his work with the quiet stubbornness that made men who were not noble more kingly than some who were. He had a way of speaking to sailors that let them think they had meant to obey him. He had a way of walking a pier that made it feel narrower if you had something to hide. He had a way of looking at a river that made it tell him its secrets like a child telling a game badly. By mid-morning his men had the lower keys in hand, and 2 of the sallow, bony men he'd brought from Dragonstone had caught a flat-bottomed boat that had no right being so far from its fishing grounds. The boat carried sugar in quantities too rich for the men who pulled it. When Davos's steel-prowed cutter drew alongside, the younger of the 2 fishermen, a boy of 15 whose mustache was as confused as his fear, put his hands up before anyone asked him to. They found only sugar and a leather satchel with a lion worked in thread along the edge. That was lion enough to make Davos set his jaw. Ask them where they put in, he told his man. Ask them where they will put in next. Do you expect them to say? The man asked, his tone respectful and coarse. No, Davos said. But men say things to fill silence. Let them fill it. We will drag the bank below the old mill with poles after sundown. If there is a cask there with a princess in it, I will answer to the gods for frightening her. If there is a cask there with only sugar, I will answer to the king for wasting men's backs. The men laughed because this was a kind of talk they liked. Davos did not. He neither liked nor disliked. He did. He had once taken sacks of onions through a blockade and been made a knight for it. What he did now felt heavier than onions. He thought of his boys and of the quiet island home he had thought to sit on like a gull. He thought of the red woman at Dragonstone and of the way her eyes made a man feel as if he were a candle being measured for the flame. He put those thoughts where they could not interfere with his hands. In the Red Keep, the afternoon drew its strings tight one by one. Jacelyn Bywater came to the barracks as if returning to a room he had left only to fetch a piece of equipment, and made himself commander in that particular way the watch respects. He signed the right roles, yes. Poked the watch's cant in a voice that did not mock it, and he sent 2 captains to the yard on inspection, where they were met by Ser Barristan and a pair of white cloaks with a paper that said things plainly enough a man could not mistake the shape of them even if he were illiterate. The captains went to a room below the kitchens not large enough to argue in, and came out later with their cloaks on their arms and their faces damp. Slint found out that his office had moved while he sat at his desk. He was a big man accustomed to rooms saying yes to him. He said no to what he was told and no again, and then, when Bywater did not say anything at all in reply but simply had 2 men move their feet to the right places, he tried a very loud yes indeed. That grew smaller in his mouth when he understood that the men who had always laughed with him had found their own mouths drying unexpectedly. He went home to his fine new house with its lionatic candlesticks and sat down slowly in a chair and did not drink. His wife, a small neat woman with no illusions about what husbands are made of, stood for a long time in the doorway and did not speak because there are times speech only sets things off like a spark, and this was a room full of tinder. Ned had expected that when Stannis came the queen would become some softer shape of herself to meddle herself to survive him. He had underestimated her. She made herself harder. She moved through the keep like someone who had been told a long time ago that the world would become the way she said if she only kept saying it enough, and refused any new story. She went to Maegor's Holdfast with her sons and her women and, at the drawbridge, turned and looked back at the Red Keep as if it were a man who had not appreciated her sufficiently. The drawbridge came up, and the enchantment of the island within the castle worked upon it. Maegor's Holdfast looked like a toy in a boy's hands until you noticed how thick the stone was and how few points it offered to any arrow. Ser Barristan placed Ser Mandon Moore and Ser Ares Oakheart at the Holdfast door. He would have chosen different men if he could have. Jaime had claimed his own place, and the rest of the Kingsguard had to be measured against the Queen's in a way that made the old man's mouth a tight thing. He walked away afterwards with his hands clasped behind him and the set of his shoulders that meant he was praying without words. Arya saw him from a balcony she was not supposed to be on and thought he looked like a white tree with no leaves. Arya was everywhere she was not supposed to be. Syrio had made her feet clever and her breath smaller. She watched the moving of guards as a child watches ants, intent and pleased with her own understanding. And when she found Jory by chance, she fell into step with him and told him so many things at once, he had to laugh despite the lines the day had cut around his mouth. "I will tell your father you are a watchman now," he said. "And have you sworn to stand with 1 foot in wine and 1 in the gutter and to learn to make yourself invisible when lords ask for you to carry their shame?" "I am invisible now," Arya said very seriously. "Syrio says a girl who can empty her head of her own colors can fill it with the colors around her, and men will not see her because they are too busy seeing themselves." Jory made his face grave. "Then empty it when you are not with me," he said. "When you are with me, fill it with my dull speech so that later you may repeat it to your father when I forget. I am to take a writ to the river posts that says no gold cloaks duck their heads to let lions pass." "Ducks do not do that," Arya said. "Ducks do not live in the river. Mostly they do, but not those ducks, the ones that bend down. Those are mallards," Jory said, trying to look wise and not quite pulling it off. "Those are men," Arya said, and darted away before he could pretend to cuff her. Near evening, the High Septon sent word that he would receive the king at the Great September to pray for Robert's soul. It had in it all the right pious words and 1 or 2 extra, which meant the man was afraid and working hard to look as if he were not. Stannis went with a small retinue, a pair of stormlords whose names did not matter but whose swords did. Ser Barristan, Davos, Ned, and a handful of gold cloaks Bywater had vetted that afternoon with eyes like pincers. The city had rung the bells and rung them and now had gone hoarse with the effort. The Great Sept stood like a confectioner's mad idea of a mountain, all white and bright and a little foolish until you went inside and the cool took your sweat and made you feel, briefly, clean. The High Septon was a small man inside his enormous robes, and when he lifted his arms the cloth made shadows as large as if a bigger man had moved. He sang a prayer that had been sung for every king for 300 years, and Stannis bowed his head and did not close his eyes. The people who had crowded the nave and the ambulatory to see the king, who was not yet crowned, put their eyes upon him harder than any prayer. When the prayer ended, Stannis put his hand upon the altar and said, "The law that gave you your place will be upheld while I live." He did not ask for the man's blessing. He neither begged nor boasted. He merely said a thing and left it, like a man who has found his own name. Outside, on the steps, a man's voice rose and the crowds followed it, a swaying thing. Ned turned his head and saw a thin fellow with a patchy beard standing atop a barrel holding a scrap of parchment with a lion's stamp at the bottom. He was telling the crowd the contents as if he hated them for needing his voice to have their eyes. "The boy is beautiful," the man bellowed. "The boy is born of king and queen, and the gods have given him the brow of a stag and the hair of a summer field. The boy is beloved. The boy is rightful. Shout if you love the boy." There were shouts. There are always shouts. Men like to love things they can see and hate things more easily still. Davos's men found the second boat after midnight, though it was not a boat so much as a piece of the river that had decided to drift reluctantly in the shape of one. They pulled it out of the reeds with a sound like the tearing of cloth. Weeds gave. Frogs protested. In the bottom of the craft there was a dress of pink wool, the color a rich woman chooses for a child when she wants to pretend the child is not what she is, and in the folds there were 2 pearls, river-slimed and struggling to shine. Davos held the dress up so the moon could see it and then lowered it and did not say the word princess aloud, for fear the river would snatch it back. "Upstream," he told his men, and they went. They found nothing else that night. The river is stubborn and does not give up what it takes without a price. The price could be time or blood or both. Davos paid time. He would not pay blood if he could help it. He returned to the keep with the dress wrapped in oiled cloth and brought it to Ned, because Ned Stark was the kind of man one brought such a thing to. "This is a sign," Davos said, apologizing with his shoulders for the word. "Not a shorty." "It is enough," Ned said. He held the dress a moment longer than a man might, and in that moment his mind provided a second image. Sansa's hands smoothing velvet that first day they had come to King's Landing, and her voice saying "it is all so pretty," and something like cold flame moved through him. "Tell the king," he said. Stannis took the dress and looked at it as if it were a document to be examined for forgery. He raised his eyes. "She will have gone to the Rock or to Dorne," he said, and both possibilities tasted of salt and headache. "If to the Rock, we will pry her out when we pry the gold from her grandsire's teeth. If to Dorne," he broke off. "I will not speculate. We do not make war with our mouths. We make it with ships and men. Lord Stark, you will write to Lord Mace Tyrell and to Lord Hoster Tully. They will be told the law as I tell it and asked whether they mean to live under it or under a lion. You will write your brother's lady in the Vale and tell her the moon door is not the only way out of fear. She will bring the boy she clings to court, or the court will one day come to her." "She will not," Ned said, weary around the edges with the knowledge. "She does not believe there is a world outside her own worries." "Then we will send her a small, manageable world," Stannis said curtly, "with a seal on it." He looked to Littlefinger. "You will draft the letters for my hand." "I write good law," Littlefinger said, his eyes bright with mischief that never looked entirely like mischief. "I cannot write friendship, and I cannot write men brave who are not." "Then write what you can," Stannis said. That night Ned did not eat. He walked the yard instead with Tomard and the weight of the day behind him like a cloak too heavy to shrug off and too binding to fight in. The moon had gone thin as a fingernail. It hung over the armory, making the slope of the roof look like something a wolf had left in a hurry. He passed the Godswood and paused at its iron-banded door. There was no heart tree here. The Undul gods had cut those down long ago. But there was a little square of green where a man could pretend it was quiet for reasons other than fear or exhaustion. Ned stood with the leaves' dampness brushing the back of his hand, and he thought of the gods and of the things men made of them. When he turned away, he found Varys in the path somehow without having had to enter it. The eunuch's slippers did not trouble gravel or grass. "I have a thing," Varys whispered. One of my little ones came to me with eyes like milk and fingers as cold as a grave. He had been in the tunnels of the old storehouses under the Alchemists' Guild. He lifted his hands and let them fall. Wildfire, enough to make the city see green gods. Who set men to it? Ned asked, though he knew the answer with a kind of despair that had no heat to it at all. Men with hair like gold and tempers like it too, Varys said softly. They would burn the city before they would let a stone of it be held by someone who did not kneel to their father. If they think themselves to be losing, they will make us all a candle. Tell the king, Ned said. I will, Varys said. I always tell someone. It is a pity how seldom the right person is that someone. He cocked his head. Do you ever tire of being right in a way that costs so much? Yes, Ned said simply, and left him in the leaf shadow. In the morning, Stannis stood before the Iron Throne and read a letter he had written himself. There was a plainness to his words that was not poetry and not art, but had a kind of austere beauty for all that. He said that Robert had been king by law and by the consent of the realm, and that law made the heir. He said that he was not the realm's father, but its steward in the true old sense of the word, the one a man used when he meant to put back more into the storehouse than he took. He said that those who swore literal oaths should keep the literal thing they swore, not their own interpretations of it. He said that men who served him would be rewarded and men who defied the law would be judged not because he hated them but because the law would still be there when he was gone and it must be held to so that men after them could be measured. He sent the letter in 100 hands and with it went smaller notes for smaller men, and each was written in the same plain ink. Littlefinger penned many of them at Stannis's order, his quill scratching out truths with the ease of a man who had sold their opposites. Ned wrote his own to the north with a heaviness that had become familiar and asked Robb to attend him with a small household guard only, not an army. There might be war and there might not. The north must not be left naked to the cold for the sake of a southern summer quarrel. He wrote Hoster Tully as son and lord both. He wrote Brynden Blackfish in a hand that snuck respect under the line. 3 days moved that way, like a wheel whose rim had been bent so that every turn jarred the hand that held it. News came like pigeons and ravens both, one fat, one lean, both with the same small cunning. From the west, Lord Tywin had left the rock with a great host and the banners of the west rippled like a cold golden sea. From the Trident, riders had been seen bearing the black and white of the sigil of Ser Gregor Clegane, and fires had been seen where no harvest required them. From the Vale, Lisa Arryn had retreated further into herself and addressed her letters less to the king than to the gods, whose eyes she seemed to think were in the paper itself. From Highgarden, flowers did what flowers do. A sweet scent, a lovely nod, a no that did not look like a no. From Dragonstone itself, an older hand had penned a letter that made Ned's chest ache. Maester Cresson, upright as a candle, telling the king what it had cost to keep that small bleak court steady under a man like Stannis and what it would cost yet, and how the young princess was a bright, brave child, and how a red priestess had come and made the courtyard seem like a road to a new god. The letter did not speak ill. It did not speak well. It spoke only the weather, but it made Ned think of fire that did not keep men warm. Stannis read that letter and did not comment. He put it aside as if putting aside a plate with a taste he did not prefer but could eat if the need arose. Cersei kept to Maegor's holdfast and made of it a court within a court. It had a breath like perfume and steel, expensive and close. Joffrey postured and flared. Tommen tried not to sweat in his velvet. The queen wrote, and when she wrote she pressed so hard the quills snapped sometimes, and the room filled with little birds and the wish to break their necks. Jaime came and went as if the drawbridge were an extension of his own arrogance. The queen's women wept sometimes when no one looked and then turned their faces so that their tears dried and the skin cracked just so. Fashionable and tragic and wholly false. On the fourth morning, Ned was summoned to Stannis' Solar, a room that had belonged to Aerys once and to Robert after, and that now held itself with the careful neutrality of stone that has seen too many versions of the same man. "You have a look," Stannis said without rising. "It is not a mood, I think, because you are not a man for moods. It is an impression, like a hand pressed in wax." "What pressed it?" "Tywin Lannister will not bend," Ned said. He will bring steel to where you have put parchment. He will do it quickly. Yes, Stannis said. It is a strange thing to say of a lion, but it is true. He moves quickly. He does not chatter. He rolls his weight. He builds. I do not mistake him for a fool. I will not mistake him for a king. He gestured to the map spread on the table, its paint rubbed thin where men's fingers had worried at it for years. He takes the river. He will reach for Harrenhal. He will sit there with his son at his foot and call it a seat and call the men who come to him steel. We will not give him what he wants. And what does he want? Ned asked. It was a test. He knew the answer. He wanted to hear the man say it. He wants to choose the realm and then tell it the realm chose him, Stannis said. He wants to burn away the bits that don't fit so that the rest can glitter. He wants to be the first letter in his grandchildren's histories and the last letter in his enemies' names. Stannis bent over the map, and for a moment he looked not like a king but like a craftsman with a tool he did not love but knew how to use. He wants us to hurry. We will make him wait. How? Ned asked, not because he doubted but because he wanted the shape of it. We strengthen the city and we send troubles to the west, Stannis said. Not armies. The wrong army now will give him what he wants. Men with flags and songs. No, we send riders with rumors into the Westerlands, whispers that the Ironborn have put out again, that the Manderly fleets have taken ships up the Mander and all the world is boats. We remind the Crakehalls and the Marbrands and a dozen smaller names that they have enemies they have forgotten. We pay small lords to remember old feuds. We make Tywin divide his attention and his horses. Ned could not help it. The smallest nod of respect left his neck. You are not a man for tricks, your grace, but you know how to use other men's tricks when they turn to tools. I know how to win, Stannis said. It was not vanity. It was a statement like saying water puts fire out. Lord Stark, I will have your oath to me before the realm when I am crowned. I will ask it now as man to man. You have it, Ned said. You had it when you walked into the hall and did not sit the throne because the law had not yet put your weight there. Good, Stannis said and stood. There is, he paused, and in the pause Ned saw what only a few men had seen before. The hinge inside Stannis that gave when logic made it, and that otherwise would be stone forever. There is another thing. Your daughter Sansa may go to Winterfell with your lady if you wish it. Arya I would keep. Ned had expected the request to be reversed. He kept his face plain and asked the question that mattered. Why Arya? Because she is not made like Sansa, Stannis said with a grimace that might almost have been the shadow of a smile. Sansa is a maiden of courts. Courts eat such girls and ask for sauce. Arya is a little wolf. She will not be safe at court either, but she will not be safe anywhere because she will go into the world looking for the danger as much as it comes looking for her. I would keep her where I can keep an eye on the knife she carries inside her. He looked directly at Ned. If we are to make a realm that will not shatter when the first storm runs at it, we will need girls who do not only sew banners. We will need girls who climb walls and learn to hear men's feet. I do not know what she will be. I know she will not be what the realm will try to make her. That is something. It was not. It was something deep. It was something that frightened him. Ned thought of Winterfell's quiet ways and Arya's not quiet ways and what might happen if they separated now. But there was also the other truth Stannis did not say. King's courts kept daughters for bond. The difference here was that the king spoke it like law rather than coaxing it with soft. Let me speak with my lady, Ned said. Do so, Stannis said, but do not take too long. When the river rises, the man who does not pick his footing quickly is the man the river picks its footing for. The crown came a week after Robert's death, because the realm must see the thing it obeys. The High Septon did bless, because his god loved order so long as it rang the bells loudly enough, and Stannis did not balk at crossing himself before the seven. He wore a plain circlet of old gold that made him look both more ordinary and more kingly. It had the virtue of looking like it belonged to the realm more than to the man, and that was proper. Davos stood among the lords at the back with his hands behind his back and his eyes on the king and thought, I am in a place no onion seller fights his way to, and I can smell only wax. Ned watched the faces in the crowd. The small folk made their noises. The laughter, the ohang, the murmurs that told of stories being born 2 steps to his left. The Lord's faces were the important ones. Royce was a granite cliff. Redwine showed more interest in the capon he had eaten after than the crown. Varys watched with his endless interest. Littlefinger clapped exactly as much as necessary and no more. Pycelle made his beard bob. Ser Barristan stood with his clean lines and his sword and did not look tired. Jaime stood at the edge like a bright mistake and grinned until his sister's eyes fixed him, and then did not grin any longer, or pretended not to. It should have been the peace after that. It was not. Peace after a crown is the pause between the cup being filled and being drunk. The city exhaled. The west inhaled. In the riverland between them, men began to die for reasons that would seem small to the gods and large to those men's widows. A field burned, a cow taken, a boy foolish enough to shoot a hare who was not a hare but a scout. The first true test came not from the west but from within, as it does in cities. A butcher in Flea Bottom shouted that the king had said the queen's children were bastard-born. He was drunk and had not read any letter, but he had found himself in a crowd, and the way sound had worked upon his chest made him brave. His shout was answered by a stone and then a knife. The gold cloaks waded in with their cudgels, and 3 men fell, and 1 man rose with his mouth broken and laughed for the sheer surprise of the taste. Word ran. It always runs. It never tires. Bywater's men held. They held at the fish market when someone tried to pull a proclamation down and was told to read it before he tore it. They held at the Street of Flour when 2 bakers fought over whether Stannis would tax bread or only salt, which meant that the argument was really about whether the world would be better tomorrow or worse. They held at the September of Baelor when 2 of the queen's women came out with a priest and wept very piously for a while in a way that made a small crowd coo. A boy who had been taught too much by the wrong men threw offal at them. Jacelyn Bywater had him thrashed and let him go. The boy would never love the watch, and perhaps he should not, but he would think twice and thrice before he threw another thing at a woman to prove his love for the realm. Through it all, the queen sat at her island within the castle and wrote. She wrote to men who had never read a woman's letter before and found themselves flattered by the fact of it. She wrote to men who had only ever read their mother's letters and loved women because of that. She wrote to the faith and told it that Stannis served a foreign god, which was not yet even true, and the rumor slid through the city like a red eel. She wrote to Lord Tywin and to Mace Tyrell and to the Eyrie and even to Dorne. Men gossiped of rings in her words, of strands of gold hair tied in each message, of little kisses pressed along the seals. Men always make a romance of their ruin where queens are concerned. Queens always let them. Ned went to see her once because there are visits men must pay not because they think anything will be altered by them, but because duty is a road that passes through places you would rather not go. The drawbridge came down and his boots crossed it and came up clean, because that island kept itself polished always. The door guards, Aerys and Mandon, took his sword and looked embarrassed about it even as they did it. They had learned enough of him to know the sword was not for them, or at least not first, and had learned enough of their queen to know embarrassment did not concern her. She received him in a room with windows onto the river, as if she were reminding herself and any man who entered that she could leave whenever she liked. Her hair was perfect, with the kind of perfection that takes the attention of 5 women and 3 men to make and the patience of a sorcerer. Joffrey stood at her elbow with a hand on his dagger that did not make him look brave and did not make him look wise. Tommen clutched a wooden stag as if its nubs for antlers might defend him better than any white cloak. "You stand," Cersei said when he did not bow. She had learned somewhere that this was a good opening gambit with a northern wolf, to pretend his courtesies were his weapon and to make him decide whether to draw it. "Fine. Stand. Men will think you are a pillar, and that is a story you like. I came to tell you that the city will keep peace," Ned said. "Not for me, not for the king, for the children who will have to live in it when we are dust. The city loves gossip more than peace," the queen said. "It will feed on you now that you have taken away the sweetest morsel, a coronation without a song." She looked at her son. "Tell Lord Stark what you will do when you are a man." Joffrey raised his chin. "Hang traitors," he said promptly, "and make songs illegal." They are lies. Ned considered for a moment and then nodded to the boy. You are not wrong about songs, he said. They are lies. The best of them are the most honest lies. They make men brave in the wrong ways and for the wrong reasons. A king who loves songs is a dangerous thing. He turned back to Cersei. Keep the boy away from poets and from men who flatter with swords. Keep him nearer to men who know the smell of pigs. The realm will suffer less for it. Cersei's laugh had no warmth in it. You think you will be here long enough to tell me how to raise my son? O Lord Stark, wolves come to the south and think the south will become a forest if they only bring enough snow in their cloaks. She took a step closer, and her scent had that cut flower sweetness that told you the flower had been cut a day too long. He will be brave in the ways men are brave, handsome in the ways women like. He will be crowned in the end because his grandsire has more hands than you have fingers, and because the world loves a lovely lie better than a hard truth. He will sit where you will not. Her eyes glittered. And when he does, I will send you a letter if you are still alive, and it will begin, Dear Lord Stark, and you will be too honorable to tear it up without reading. Perhaps, Ned said. He did not waste his heart on disliking her. That had never helped any man who had done it. He took back his sword at the door and left with the sense of a man leaving the chamber of a fever he could not treat. He went to see Stannis after that and found him with Davos, a map, and the smell of wax. The king looked up and seemed as if he had not yet sat down, even though his body had been in a chair for some time. She will write the realm into a noose, he said, as if he had been present for Ned's interview with the queen and was answering it. She will try, Ned said. I will have men watch the pyromancers, Stannis said. Varys says wildfire. I would not burn for a lie. He looked at Davos. You will find any store that is not accounted for and you will count it. If anyone tells you to leave it alone, you will cut their hand off. I will sign a paper for it if you require one. He returned his gaze to Ned. If Tywin makes directly for the city, we will meet him on the right bank of the Blackwater and make him pay to cross. He will likely not. He will send men to burn everything else that is not stone in the riverlands. He is not a fool. He will not try stone until the other work is done. What of Renly? Ned asked, because the South moved when the Reach did and Renly had charm enough to make men forget the words they had just sworn to someone else. What of him? Stannis asked flatly. He is a boy with a crown in his eyes and a garden in his heart. He has gone to Highgarden. He will smile and they will feed each other sweet lies. When the lies are done, they will make ugly truths and serve those. They will come, or they will not. Either way, we cannot wait for them. I will send letters that will shame them if they remember the word. I do not expect it to be the kind of word Tyrells remember. That night the wind came east for a time, and the city's smell lifted out of the streets and hung at the height of men's mouths like a taste you did not want but could not avoid. There were torches at the harbors and extra men at the gates. A storm moved far out to sea like a thought moving toward a man who did not yet know it would change him. Sansa came into Ned's solar without knocking and stood with her hands clenched together in front of her like a little prayer. She had been crying and had dabbed away the tears with care so as not to make herself blotchy. Even her grief had learned to dress itself. "Father," she said, and the dignity in the word was too big for her mouth. "They say you would send me away. I would send you home," Ned said, softening his voice the way a man softens his hands when they have learned to hold swords and must now hold a child. "There is a difference." Her mouth trembled. "I am to marry a prince," she said, and he had not the heart to press the word bastard upon her now and make it a sword. "I am to be queen one day. I am to be loved by the people. If I go, they will forget me. If I go, I will be only a girl. If I go, I will never come back. You are my child," Ned said. "You will be that wherever you are." "I am also theirs," she said, surprising him. Her eyes bright with some hard intelligent sorrow had sharpened in her. "The songs say so. I know you do not like songs, but I think sometimes they teach how men look. If I go, I will always be the girl who went. If I stay, I might be something else one day. I might be something you would be proud to have stayed for. I am proud already, Ned said. It was true in a way that ached deep. The world will try to make you small. It will do it with your smiles, not with its knives. Remember whose daughter you are. I am, she said, a whisper, and then, unexpectedly, what if I chose to go to Dorne? They say ladies there have their own swords in a manner. They say the sun is kind and the men are kinder. That is a song, Ned said gently. The truth is stranger. If we can choose, we will choose Winterfell. When things are made by other men's choosing, we will choose honor wherever they set us down. That is what is left. She wept again then, properly, as a child weeps and as a woman does when she knows there is no gain in grace. He held her and felt the wonder and terror of how small she still was and how large the world around her had turned. Arya did not ask. She came in after Sansa had gone and stood on one foot and then the other in that way of hers that made even stillness seem like movement. Syrio says I should stay, she said flatly, as if reciting a sword form. He says there are cats here I have not yet stolen from and walls I have not yet taught. He says the water is different. He says the city has a rhythm and I have not heard it yet. Syrio is a teacher, Ned said. Teachers love their own art more than they love their pupils. He would keep you because instruction is a kind of love. I would keep you because love is a kind of instruction. The king would keep you because kings keep things that matter in case they must spend them. Arya's nose wrinkled. I will bite a king, she said. Do not bite him unless he fails the law, Ned said. For him, that will be often. For you, perhaps less. He sighed. I do not know yet what we will do. I must speak to your mother. I must speak to the winter in me. I must speak to the way the city turns. Then I will decide, and you will do as you are told or you will not. And either way you will still be my child. She lifted her chin so far she nearly toppled over. I will do as I am told, she said. And then I will do as I must. Syrio says that is the way. He is not wrong, Ned said softly, and when she went he sat with his hands on his knees and felt the way a man feels when he has put 2 stones into 2 different pockets and knows he will need both, and cannot carry both in one hand. At dawn on the 8th day, Bywater hanged 2 watchmen at the river gate. He did it because they had taken coin from a Lannister man and had let a boat pass with a message on it that had been cut from a lion's skin in ink. He did it because the law must hang where men can see it if it is to do any good at all. He did it because the king had said break them if they break the peace, and the king had not meant merely their hunger. The bodies moved a little in the breeze, and men looked away and then looked back despite themselves. A child asked his mother why they were dancing. The mother said it was a song the city sang for those who could not hear. That same morning Davos's men pulled a rotten boat from the reeds far upriver with a little girl's shoe caught in its plank seam. It had a lion stamped inside the leather, very delicate. Davos looked at it for a long time and then had it sent to the king. Stannis looked at it for a shorter time and had it locked in a coffer with the dress and a small braid of hair that had been cut from a brush in a lady's chamber whose maid had been sloppy in her fear. There is a way kings keep grief. Stannis's way was to catalogue it. A fortnight into the new reign, a messenger came ashore like a crow hopping down to a different patch of blood. He wore a plain brown cloak and boots that had seen service. He had the look of a man who has had to leave quickly and not from boredom. He asked for the king and would say nothing until he stood before him, and then said a thing that made the room inhale and hold its breath and not yet exhale. Renly Baratheon had had himself proclaimed king in Highgarden, and the Tyrell roses had opened to him. He had ridden through a shower of flower petals, and men had cried because he smiled and because they loved him for letting them love him. Stannis's face did not change. Only that hinge, deep within, set itself again with a small click. Then we will have 2 wars, he said. One of lies, one of law. We will win one first and the other after, and we will not change the order no matter who cries for songs. He turned to Ned. Send the letter to Highgarden you prepared for the day they shamed themselves. Send the one for Storm's End. If it stands for me, good. If it stands for Renly, I will stand before it as I would before a man who claims my name in a mirror. Storm's End stands for you, Davos said, and there was something like hunger in his voice, and something like faith that was not the faith of the 7. It will not open for a boy who laughs at its walls. Stannis looked at him and gave one single hard nod that acknowledged both the truth and the man who had spoken it. Then the wall holds, he said briefly. We will see if the garden pulls itself up and plants itself somewhere else. He looked to Ser Barristan. And you, Ser, if a white cloak can carry a message without soiling itself, carry this. The sword is not made to be worn with roses. It cuts them.
Ser Barristan Baud.
He had the look of a man who had been given a blade, sharpened on both sides, and told to carry it in a crowd of children. I will carry it, he said. That night, alone in his chamber, Ned took out the Book of Lineages again. It fell open to its old place as some things do after the hand has developed a habit with them, and he stared at the simple arithmetic of hair and eye and jaw. Seed is strong, John Aaron had said, and had died for it. The seed was strong. The lies around it were stronger, or at least louder. He traced with a nail the neat, honest charts. He thought of boys with gold hair standing in light and being told to think themselves kings because kings used to stand in light and look like that. He thought, too, of winter. It had been there, far off against the horizon of his mind, and now it felt nearer. The business of crowns made men forget the weather. The weather did not forget men. There were wild things in the north, not just men who wore skins or neighbors who called the Ironborn honest because at least they named theft for what it was. There were old things that did not love the heat and did not fear the cold. There were walls and vows and stones with blood in them. The letter to Winterfell he had sent had said enough. The letters he would send next would say more. He would have Robb close the moat as a man closes his lips on a secret. He would have the ships at White Harbor watched and the doors of Deepwood Mott barred. He would have Maester Luwin weigh grain as if it were gold and count men as if they were grain. He would have the heart tree hear that the world was changing. In the keeps of other men, other thoughts moved like cats. Varys set down 2 little pipes and told a child to listen with both ears. Littlefinger sat very quiet and drew the world as a series of debt columns and thought that the addition of 1 or 2 more crowns to the top of the page did not change the sums beneath. Pycelle slept and dreamed of being young and was young in the dream and did not know as much as he thought he had then. Cersei lay awake and made a list in her mind of men who had failed her and men she would make pay and men she would make forgive her so that they could fail her again later. Jaime dreamed of a white cloak as a wave and of a throne as a reef, and in the dream he swam and did not mind drowning. Dawn came the way it always comes, exactly on time and with no interest in the great affairs of men. Ned put on his clothes, plain as he always wore them, and went to the yard and watched Ser Barristan teach a boy a simple turn meant to keep an older man alive, and then went to a table to sign a notice that said the price of bread should not change because men were shouting, and then to another table to read a letter from White Harbor that said the year's whales were late and that men believed this meant one thing when it perhaps meant another. He felt very small and very large at once. A man whose feet were exactly his feet and yet whose steps sounded loud. There would be war. There would be a brother making himself sun out of roses, and a father in gold making himself mountain out of men, and a smuggler made night building ships out of boys and rope. There would be a girl in Dorne perhaps, playing in a sun square under eyes that watched her as if she were a promise the realm would one day collect. There would be a woman in a pale hot court across the world whose dragons were not yet hatched, who would begin to hear the world speak her name again in the tongues of men who had never seen her face. There would be crows on gallows and words on walls and fires at Hillfoot and at Hall. There would be winter, and all the things summer tells itself cannot be true. And in the middle of these, there would be a man made of law and habit and the hard plain knowledge of what duty is when one has stripped it of all the pleasant ornaments. Ned set his hand to the first paper of the day and signed it and reached for the second and knew that tomorrow he would reach again, and the day after and the day after that, until the time came that he could not. And then men would be left with the pile of his signed papers and the memory of a man who had tried to keep his words in the same shape in which they had left his heart. When the raven came from the wall, it came blacker than other ravens, perhaps only because the mind makes such birds blacker. This message was short. It said the night was cold and getting colder. It said men had seen things that were not men. It said Lord Commander Mormont requested riders to be sent to all the kings and the king's men who could be made to listen, that the wall stood and would stand, but that the world behind it had shifted in its sleep and turned an eye upon them the way a bear turns when the twig snaps. Ned took that letter to Stannis with the same gravity he had brought the dress. Stannis read it without blinking and then lifted his eyes. "We prepare for winter," he said. "We do not stop preparing for winter because our Neeg boars have set their houses on fire in the autumn to spite us. If I am to be a king true to law, I must be true to this law too, the one the world itself enforces." His mouth compressed. "Lord Stark, I will require the North's love for its own hard truths now." "You have it?" Ned said, and felt the wolf in him stir and incline its head in the direction of that old, cold word, and then he went to write again. Outside the windows, the banners stirred, and now and again one of them cracked in the wind like a small oath. The city breathed and muttered. Far away, in gardens and in godswoods, in the narrow corners of alleys and the wide courts where nobles pretended the sky was different because they could afford a better view of it, men looked up and felt the strange minute's hush that sometimes comes to a city when it realizes all at once that it is a single thing and not merely many together. Past. Hush cannot be kept like treasure. But some men remembered it long years later and said it was the moment before the true storm broke, and some said it was the moment in which the realm chose or was chosen. In the Tower of the Hand, Arya lay awake and stared at the ceiling and imagined it was the undersurface of a bridge and that she was on the other side, on stones, with water under her and a river talking. She held her wooden practice sword in her hand and made her breath small and even. In a different bed, Sansa lay awake too and composed polite phrases to girls she had not met yet in Dorne and in Highgarden, and in a dozen places the songs had told her would be kind to her if she was kind to them first. And without knowing it, she adjusted those phrases a little until one or two of them held iron. Cersei did not sleep. She wrote. She wrote to a lord whose wife had laughed at her once, and to a man who had once kissed her, and to a woman whose gown she had envied, and to her father, and to her father's memory, and to her own pride. Jaime slept, eventually, and dreamed again, because for him sleep was a sword he had always known how to draw when it pleased him and to put up when it did not. Stannis slept like a man who allowed himself only the hours he could not do without and woke when he meant to. He did not dream, or if he did, he made no note of it in the day. Ned, when sleep at last came to him, dreamed of Winterfell and of a gate closed against a wind, and of a boy with dark hair laughing on a wall. He woke with his hand clenched on a shape his mind had provided, an antler, perhaps, or the bone of some old truth, and found only the coverlet beneath it. He rose, put on his clothes, and went to the window. The dawn had not yet washed the city. He could just make out the dark thickness of the river and the lights moving on it like thoughts, like plans. He stood there until the first pale seep of morning laid a new page upon the world, and then he turned back to the table and the day's work lay ready, and he set his hand to it, as he always had, as he always would, until he could not. Outside the Red Keep, beyond the walls and the bells and the proclamations, beyond the cranes on the quays and the carts in the alleys, a cloud banked itself in the east, gray upon gray upon gray, and if a man stood with his back to the sea and a hand over his eyes, he could say, honestly and quietly, winter is nearer today than it was yesterday, and I have felt its breath. He would say it to no one. He would go about his errands. He would buy fish. He would go to work in a counting house and count the day's coins. He would live under a king who had made himself out of law and knives, and he would tell his wife that perhaps this one would last a while, and his wife would say that kings are not for us, and he would agree, and yet, when the bells rang later for a small thing, a lord's arrival, the opening of a new market, he would put his head up like everyone else and listen as if the bells might this time be telling him something he could use. In the castle, the ravens were fed and the inkpots filled and the blades oiled. Men in white stood where they had always stood, only more so. Men in gold stood at the gates and on the walls and in the alleys in twos and threes. A smuggler counted men like ships. A queen counted enemies like beads. A king counted hours. And somewhere in the dark of a storehouse under the city, in a room that smelled of old parchment and damp and a different kind of fear, a clay jar was nudged by a rat's body and rocked on its shelf and did not fall. The rat looked at it as if it were a moon and went away, because rats know more and less than men, and do not burn cities for love. The vaults beneath the Alchemists' Guild held their own weather. The air was still and thick, as if a great lung had taken a breath 300 years ago and never bothered to release it. And in that man-made cave the rows of clay jars gleamed softly as if remembering green light. Haleen of the Pyromancers bore a lantern with 2 thin tongues of flame. He kept it pushed out before him like a man holding the muzzle of a hound. Ned walked at his shoulder with Davos Seaworth behind, and a pair of gold cloaks followed at 3 paces with their faces fixed as men fix their faces when they pass a graveyard and prefer to think themselves brave. "My order," Haleen said, and there was pride in the possessive and trembling in the pride, "has guarded the substance since the days when dragons flew as common as hawks. It is an art, Lord Hand, a discipline. The small folk call it hellfire and whisper, but wildfire is a thing of measure, of care, and of ruin," Ned said. He let his eyes stray only briefly to the shelves. Jar after jar after jar, fat-bellied, sealed in wax and marked with the arcane sigils of a guild that had outlived dynasties by discovering the trick of being useful and useless in the same hour. "Of course," Haleen breathed. "Of course, but so are all good substances. Consider grain, my lord. It feeds a city and starves it when mishandled." He rested the lantern on a bracket with a caution that would have done for an old man setting down a sleeping child. "We have an inventory. We always have an inventory." He handed a parchment to Ned, who did not take it, and then to Davos, who did. Davos's rough thumb touched each line as if to test whether it would smudge. Numbers, tallies, locations, cellars, cisterns, old catacombs that the guild had claimed as their own under a tangle of ancient rites. "The Queen," Ned said, "has asked for jars, without writ." His voice did not sharpen. It cooled. Haleen bowed his head until the lantern light made a crown of gold on the sparse hairs across it. "A royal personage's word is not law," Davos finished mildly, and when Haleen's watery eyes flashed to him with the reflex that men of old guilds had for upstarts, the smuggler knight only looked back, calm as a good tide. "The king commands. All else is wish. The king has said the jars do not move without his seal or the hands. We will do as the king says." "We will," Haleen said quickly. He spread his hands like a man showing they were empty and not to be feared. "We will. The order is loyal to crown and city. Loyal." He turned his head, listening to a sound only he heard, the soft breath of old catastrophes. "There are other stores, Lord Hand, hidden in times when the city feared sack. The jars do not like to be forgotten." He swallowed. "They weep. The oil sweats. We keep them tended. There is a place under the Street of Sisters, another beneath Dragon Square, a little one beneath an old hall by the river gate. The substance is alive, my lord. It answers the world's temper. If men begin to shout, if there is violence in the air, wildfire thinks with the crowd. Then it will think with my order," Ned said. "The jars come to the guild houses named on your list. The cellars not here will be emptied. If a jar breaks on the way, I will keep the law with your tongue for it." Haleen did not blanch. "It will not break," he said, and then bowed again until his neck creaked. "We will fetch the shy ones back to the nest. We will sing to them. We will calm them." He looked down at his parchment as if to remind himself which century he lived in. "It is good to have a king who cares for measure." Davos tucked the inventory into his surcoat and, when they had climbed back into air that had not been breathed by kings and dragons, he let out a gust only halfway to laughter. "A man who calls fire alive," he said. "I have known sailors who spoke of storms as if they were wives, and storms at least wet you in the same manner a woman might. Fire. Fire remembers," Ned said softly, thinking of the way a hearth keeps heat under ash and thinks itself patient. "Sometimes it remembers too well." They parted there, Davos taking 2 of Bywater's men to begin closing the hidden cellars, Ned turning his steps back to the keep. The morning had come sharper than the last, the light on the river bright enough it made a man squint even if he had been bred to snow. The boom across the Blackwater had fresh logs and new chain. A flock of gulls perched upon it as if upon a bulky sea serpent, and cackled to one another about the city's news with the disrespect of the free. On the King's Gate, Jacelyn Bywater stood with his iron hand tucked in his belt as if it were a tool he did not care to display. He turned at Ned's approach and bowed a fraction. 2 captains went out of step to the Queen's tune," he said. They go no further. Slint is in his house pretending his chair is not missing. You hanged 2 men yesterday, Ned said. Bywater's face did not move. I hanged 2 men who had stopped being men and started being holes other men poured coin into. They did not weigh enough to keep the law down. He looked out at the stir of carts and capes along the road. Your price on bread and salt holds. There are grumblers and brave bakers. I have put a brave baker in the stocks and let the grumblers throw bad fruit. It will keep. Thank you, Ned said simply. He had discovered, in the course of this long city, that thanks cost little and taught men as much as threats did, if given to the right men. Bywater inclined his head in acceptance and not modesty. Word had a way of arriving in the yard before it had reached men's ears by honest means. Ned knew that before he turned and saw Varys and Littlefinger together under the shade of a lime-washed arcade, smiling like 2 cats who did not agree about the cream but were content to drink from the same bowl. They bowed. A matched pair, the one with hands like doves, the other with fingers like weasels. From the west, Varys cooed, a wind full of ash. Lord Tywin sits at Harrenhal like a spider brought to its own web by the smell of flies. Ser Gregor sparks the riverlands as if fire were a child's toy and he a cruel boy. Ser Amory Lorch plays the same game without the same strength. The small folk call them the 2 hands, and mean it many ways. And from the south, Littlefinger added, a rain of petals. Our young stagling of Highgarden has had a crown set upon his smiling curls. It is a pretty sight, and pretty sights have a way of convincing men a realm is a tapestry to be looked at, not a house to be kept. Men forget, Varys sighed, that tapestries are made with needles. Where? Ned asked. He did not bother to add for whom, or in whose hands the needles were. Riverrun besieged, soon if not now, Varys said. Lord Edmure rides and is ridden. Hoster Tully has taken to his bed in earnest, and his niece has left the Eyrie and rides into the same fire from the other side with a small handful and a large heart. There was a beat. Ned realized he had stopped breathing and corrected it. Caitlin, he said, making the name steadier than it wanted to be. Of course, Littlefinger said. There is something about rivers that convinces ladies they can walk upon them when they freeze. Though I suppose in this case she will try to walk them while they burn. Ned turned without another word. It did not seem useful to keep words in that company. He went to Stannis and found the king with his knuckles on a map and his mouth its usual straight line. Lord Tywin sits and sends wolves in men's clothes to gnaw at Tully's flocks, Stannis said as if replying to a thought Ned had not yet spoken aloud. Renly cavorts and thinks a crown is a flower you pin to your breast and never mind the thorn behind it. Your lady rides into danger. It is a day. She has done it before, Ned said. If she had not, I would not have loved her enough to let her do it again. Stannis's eyes flickered the smallest measure, like a ship's lamp nodding to a wave. I will send Ser Barristan to the Trident with letters and wait. I will not send an army. Not yet. Tywin would love it. He does not love much. His gaze fell again to the map. If the Tullus can hold their walls, we do 2 things at once and achieve both. Deny Tywin a quick victory and deny Renly a quick march. Robb will come, Ned said. He heard in his own voice the winter timbre that other men called sternness and he called truth. Small if he has obeyed me. Enough if he has obeyed himself. Good, Stannis said. When he comes, I will not flatter him. I will use him. There is honor in that. After he left the king, Ned went to the rookery and stood for a time in the warm smell of pigeons and old straw and thought of the sky as if it were a kind of road he could trust. He wrote to Robb again, not to command but to set a man's hand upon his son's shoulder in ink. He told him the Trident would need men who could march in a straight line, not boys who wanted to test how far they could shout before they grew hoarse. He told him to keep the flanks clean and the baggage lighter than pride. He sent the letter with a gray bird and stood with Maester Pycelle's boy as the wings took it and made a little storm in the rookery for an instant. Pycelle himself appeared in the doorway and fussed at a chain he had not earned, and Ned nodded to him because even the aged deserve the courtesy their years request, if not the authority they presume. When the dusk took hold of the day and turned the city into a series of smells and sounds, Davos followed a rumor up the Blackwater like a man following a ribbon of smoke to a hidden fire. It said, a Lycene coaster had taken a small passenger under a bundle of saffron and a sign of the lion. It said, a Bravosi oarsman had been paid a sum large enough to fracture his loyalties when spoken of. It said, the river had given something back to the sea it had not meant to take. Davos found the Lycene ship riding off the mouth of the river with her sun-painted figurehead flaking and her captain more perfume than muscle. He went aboard with men quiet as oars. He asked questions in words he made soft and iron both, and when the captain tried to throw smiles like nets, Davos's face ignored them as a rock ignores the bait. They found saffron. They found a coffer with Myrish lace and 2 little gowns done with lionwork along the hem. They found a woman's letter, untouched but for the grease of a thumb Cersei's hand, that strong script that snapped its tails like lashes, bidding a loyal friend in Sunspear receive a dear lamb for safe keeping until the shepherds at court came to their senses. She is gone to sea, Davos told Ned at midnight in a room that smelled of ink and candle wick. If I chase the ship with a single boat, I will only teach the sea my name. With 3 ships, I will teach it my weakness. If we move with a fleet, the Lannisters will call it a war with Dorne before we are ready to fight a war with anyone at sea. Ned looked at the letter and did not ask that it be read. He knew the shape of a mother's defiance even when he could not abide it. Then we prepare to be surprised by the sun, he said, and we make ready to be courteous to it until we must not be. In Winterfell, the ravens came blackly against a pale morning and Robb Stark took them upon his arm in the yard with his hair wind-tossed and the look of a boy who is beginning to understand that childhood is a smaller gate than a man supposes until he tries to walk back through it. He read his father's hand first and set his mouth. He read Stannis' hand and set his jaw. He turned to Maester Luwin and Theon Greyjoy and Great John Umber, who had ridden in 2 days past with a laugh like a fallen tree and a gift of advice men did not dare call unwelcome. The river burns, the Great John said, stamping the frost from his boots. We go and piss on it. We go, Robb said, the quick decision of youth tempered by the slow weight of the words he had read. Not all. We will not leave the north afire without men to carry sand. Lord Glover assemble a 3rd, Lord Serwyn another, the rest winter in waiting and not idleness. We go light and we go quick and we go under the king's banners. We are not kings. We are wolves who know whose stag we run with. Theon grinned, his teeth too white in the cold. Who will you send to the Iron Isles? He asked, careless as he always was when he pretended questions had no blades. If the west is busy and the south is dancing and the east is full of salt, a man with long ships might think to make himself a lord of more rocks than he sits upon. No one, Robb said, and the single word had an adult's displeasure in it. If Lord Balon thinks the realm's trouble is his tide to ride, he will ride it whether I send his son home to charm him or not. Theon, you stay. If I find a man in my camp better with a bow and worse at holding his tongue, I will be surprised. The Ironborn will do as they have always done. We will do as we must. Theon's smile tightened. He had not yet learned to hate men for telling him the truth, but he had begun to practice the motion. Luwin put his hand on a page and smoothed it, which is what maesters do when they would like to smooth the world. You will write your father, he said. You will tell him which passes you will use, which fords, which bannermen will meet you. You will keep a column of ledgers in your head while you ride. And if you cannot keep it there, you will learn the man who can. Robb nodded. The nod was his father's. We ride in 4 days, he said. And if anyone does not have a horse that answers, we will teach the man to answer instead. In the Vale, Catelyn Stark came down the high road that is no road, only a string of ledges and promises. Ser Roderick rode at her side. His whiskers stiffer for the cold and his mouth full of oaths he mostly swallowed out of politeness. The clans came apparitional out of the crags and watched and threw back their heads and laughed and vanished and appeared again. The burned men's chief stepped into the road once with a smile like a knife and a knife like a smile and said he owned the piece of sky above their heads and so they must pay him for shade. Catelyn paid him in salt and in brave talk, and Shagga son of Dolf, who was not supposed to be in the Vale at all but had gone there to see how sharp its cliffs were, said she spoke like a woman who had been followed by fear and had not had time to turn and name it. He let them pass with only a song for toll, and Ser Roderick's baritone rumbled a northern dirge until even the mountain men shifted and said it was like a wall moving somewhere beyond hearing. When they reached the riverlands proper, the fire was visible at dusk and dawn both. Smoke lay along the low places like unseasonable fog, and once they came over a rise and saw a village black to the ribs like a carcass, and in the road a tree whose leaves had been made into small curled knives by the heat. Caitlin rode through the cinders scent with her mouth tea and her eyes steady, because men watch women to learn how afraid they should be, and she would not teach them to be as frightened as she was. They found a holdfast hammered but not taken and a line of women drawing water in 2 buckets each from a spring the raiders had not found, and in the next hollow a boy with ringmail 2 sizes too big staring west with an attentiveness that made Caitlin want to lay a hand on his cheek and say, "Do not learn so quickly. The world will use you if you learn so quickly." She did not say it. She asked him where Lord Edmure was. He told her, stammering, and then blurted, "They said a dragon was coming." She looked to the sky out of habit. It was only crows. At Harrenhal, Lord Tywin Lannister sat, and his chair made that chamber look less ridiculous. The dead king's ruin had the air of a bad joke told until no one laughed, and yet no one would stop repeating it. Tywin improved everything by force of attention. Even the blackened stones seemed to pull themselves into some alignment under his regard. Ser Kevin stood at his shoulder with his ready competence, and before them a map was spread that was not the same map Stannis used, though it showed the same land. This one had the west larger by some trick of the hand. A Stannis who can sit King's Landing and not be toppled the first week is not to be despised, Tywin said without any inflection. He will not dance into our swords. He will not shout into our hands. He will make us work at it. No matter, we will work. He looked to Ser Gregor, who loomed like a failed architecture. You are a blunt instrument, Ser. When used properly, such instruments are effective. You will not waste strength on garrisons. You will burn where it makes men want walls. You will flee where it makes men feel foolish. You will not die. Gregor said nothing. His obedience was a form of silence. Ser Amory Lorch nodded too quickly, a man who loved puppies and did not know how to hold them. And Renly? Kevin asked because someone had to. Renly is a parade, Tywin said. Parades amuse crowds. They do not take cities. The Reach believes it has found a king it can prune. It has found a king it can water. The season is not yet right for either. He dipped a quill in red ink and marked 3 small, patient points along the trident. Edmure will come to me or I will come to him. He is water and will always choose to flow toward a thing rather than stand against it. The quill moved. And Lord Eddard Stark will do as he has done, be honest at the wrong times. It will be his undoing. Kevin did not say, it has not yet been. Tywin did not say, it will be. In King's Landing, Arya learned the tunnels by taste. Syrio had taught her to feel distances with her feet, but the city taught her to count them with her tongue. The dust in the passage near the Little September of the Candlemaker's Daughter tasted of old frankincense. The passage behind the Queen's Women's Solar tasted of oranges for a day, and then tasted of salt sweat and roses again. Cersei's habit of sending to the docks for fruit made a brief trace even behind walls. The tunnel that ran under the Street of Flower to the Alchemist's Guild tasted wrong, metallic and sweet. Arya wrinkled her nose and filed it away. Wrong meant watch. She crouched in a slit where 2 walls met, a crack made by settling and left alone by men too busy to fear what might seep through, and listened to voices in the solar beyond. They were women's voices and a man's, careful to be a man's voice and not a eunuch's, which meant he thought himself safe here. The words she caught came in pieces. 30, no 50. The ships, the Red Woman, if he brings her. And then Cersei's low and level as if a cat had smoothed its fur along the stones. If he brings his whore of a god to this city, I will make him choke on her ashes. Bring me what I asked for. I will not be burned by a dull man's righteousness. Arya bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted her own iron. She slid backward, away from the crack, until the wrong taste air lessened and she could breathe again. She took the passage up and left and up again until she came out behind a tapestry where a golden knight smote a seven-headed dragon. She said nothing to the guard who pretended not to see her. She carried what she had heard to Jory, because Jory was the sort of man to whom one carried words like jars and trusted him not to drop them. Jory listened with his head on a slant and his hand around the pommel of a dagger he would rather not draw. "You say red woman," he said. "She said it," Arya insisted. "And oranges." "Then that is 2 warnings," Jory said. "One for the throat and one for the stomach. Stay in your rooms tonight, little wolf. If Syrio says you should practice steps and not steal. I will tell your father the color and the fruit." Ser Barristan moved through the red keep like a man walking through an orchard in late season, taking small, precise harvests. He found Ser Mandanmore speaking softly to a gold cloak in a corridor where echoes died too soon. He found Ser Boros Blunt asleep on a bench with his hands still in a dish of honeyed almonds. He found Ser Ares Oakhart looking toward Maegor's Holdfast as if toward a woman he had been told not to see. He said nothing to any of them. He changed the watches as a chessman changes the state of a board, without speech, with the simple act of placing himself. He found Jaime Lannister in a gallery open to the sea air, arms folded, eyes on the gulls as if they were justers and he were betting on the worse one out of principle. "Sir," Jaime said without turning, "I grew bored of watching the queen count her enemies. I thought to count birds instead. They are better company. Birds," Ser Barristan said, "do not have tongues. That is why," Jaime said, and then turned with his lazy grace and smiled, that smile that had made boys want to be him and men want to prove they were not. "Do you remember the song they wrote after the Trident, Selmy? The one about Rhaegar's rubies and Robert's hammer? I never thought much of it. Too honest by half. You could tell who wrote it had been there. The good songs are the ones where no one knows a thing and so they tell everything." "I do not listen to songs," Ser Barristan said. His gaze was steady. "I listen to vows." Jaime's mouth curved. "And now you must keep one in a house where every other man is trying to break one. I sympathize." He looked past Ser Barristan, past the walls, to the distant glint where the road to Rosby ran. "If I cannot take a horse out of the city to clear my mind, I will sink into softness worse than any queenman's belly." "You will not take a horse out," Ser Barristan said evenly. "Your presence is required here." "I suspected so." Jaime's smile was the blade again. "When the board is crowded, the king looks at the knights most often. Figure of speech, old man. Do not take it to heart." "I take very little to heart," Ser Barristan said. "It is congested enough with service." He left the Kingslayer to his gulls and his memory. The day turned again, as all days do, and in its turning drew men's tempers after it. At sunset, Stannis Baratheon stood on the steps of the Great September with a circlet on his brow that had not altered his face and a proclamation in his hand that would alter other men's lives. He read it in a voice that did not strain itself with grandness. It said that wildfire stores were crown property and that production and movement of the substance would be accounted for under pain of forfeiture and maiming. It said that bread would be sold at the old price and salt at the older one. It said that any man found passing royal docks without writ would answer to the crown with rope. It said that men could pray to the gods they liked so long as they did not use those gods as an excuse to set fire to their neighbor. It said the king would come to hear petitions twice a week like a steward, not once a month like a lord. It said the crown would buy grain at a fair price and would not coin new silver thinner than the old. The crowd did not cheer. They did something more useful. They listened. They said the words to themselves to see if they would fit in their mouths later. A baker muttered that at least he knew where he stood. A fishwife muttered that at least she knew what to shout when a guard overreached his cudgel. A priest muttered that a man who spoke this way could not be entirely damned. Afterward, Varys slid to Ned's elbow with a silk soft. "Across the sea, my little one's twitter of a girl whose husband is dead and who walks into a fire at night and does not burn. They say she wakes with 3 shadows on her breast, and that old men who have never seen daylight say she is a storm come to take old names out of men's mouths." Ned rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Varys," he said, If that is true, it will not be less true if we chase it now. And if it is false, I will not spend ink on a dream." "Dreams," Varys murmured. "We are all made of them. Some men are made of other men's." "Oh, I do not press you, Lord. I only put feathers on the air. If the wind takes them to you, you will know why you are sneezing." He smiled. "The world has more fires than this city's jars. Then we will tend the ones we can see first," Ned said, "because that was how a life of sense is lived, and because there is cowardice in running to far dangers when near ones have the decency to introduce themselves." The Queen's answer to the King's edict was not a letter but a feast in Maegor's Holdfast, a feast to which no one uninvited could go and from which all gossip invited itself. She fed her household lambs with sugar-dusted apples and a boar that had been cut and rearranged to look like a stag. She had musicians who played the right songs and not the true ones. She spoke to Joffrey of destiny until the boy's eyes shone as if rubbed with oil. She told Tommen a story about a prince who had a dog and the dog never left him, and Tommen cried afterward because he did not have a dog and because he was the sort of boy who felt truths too deeply for his own happiness. Jaime came late and left early and in between smiled and said nothing men could repeat at him like stones. He watched his sister and thought of heat and of knives. He watched the boys and thought of a different life he had not had the wit to want when he was young. He watched the Queen's women and saw the way fear made even beautiful women clumsy with their cups. Back in the keep proper, Stannis ate a soldier's supper and then sent for Davos and Ned. The map lay before him as always. There were new marks on it in black, villages burned. In red, men gathered. In blue, rivers that would not move no matter what ink demanded. "We will send grain to the wall," Stannis said without any shift to his tone, as if naming the price of lamp oil. "We will send men when we can. For now, we send steel and coin. Lord Manderley will be told to provision ships and will be paid cash and honor both. If he is not paid, he will be salt in our soup. Pay him." "I will find the coin," Littlefinger said from the door, where he had appeared as if he were the chamber's idea and not a man. "The Iron Bank has a long memory and a short patience. They like kings who do not smile. They say smiles are expensive. With your permission, your grace, I will frighten them pleasantly." "Do it," Stannis said, and did not ask how. He looked to Ned. "There will be a day I will require you to go north for me and make of that duty your food. Not yet. The river first. The law first. We will not save the realm from a winter it deserves if we cannot keep men from burning it in a summer they do not." Ned inclined his head. There was a peace in having the next 5 days set in honest lines before him, even if beyond the 5th the world fell away like a cliff. Night came in planks and then all at once. In the lowest parts of the city, a single clay jar settled in its rack as a rat brushed it, and the faintest sheen of green crept around its wax as if thinking of becoming a thought. In Maegor's Holdfast, a woman with hair black as lacquer and a smile painted by fear blew out a candle and lay awake counting ways that did not count. In the Tower of the Hand, Arya Stark fell asleep with Sirio's voice in her ear. "What do we say to death? Not today." In the armory, steel whispered to leather as men checked girdings in small, private liturgies. At dawn, bells. Not the heavy, sorrowful peal that had rung for Robert, and not the quick, thin chatter of alarms, but the plain, broad music of summons. Stannis sat the Hall of 1,000 Pillars in the evening and heard petitions like a steward, as he had promised. A cooper complained that a gold cloak had taken a barrel for his mother's funeral. Stannis had the barrel returned with 6 staves for interest and the gold cloak flogged. And the cooper walked away not loving his king but loving the law, and that would do. A woman said her husband had been pressed into river service without coin. Stannis had her paid and had Davos write the name of the man who had taken the husband, and Davos wrote it without satisfaction. A knight in someone else's livery demanded a royal warrant to go and punish brigands north of Rosby. The warrant was refused and the man's sword held until he remembered whose war he was in. In the corner by the 3rd pillar, Varys stood like a shadow that had chosen to be pleasant. At the back, Littlefinger sat and watched how men spent gratitude and how they spent grievance and thought. "These are coins too." Ser Barristan stood and did not lean. Bywater came without escort and left with none. Ned remained at Stannis' side and learned that justice done without pride wears better on the soul than any cloak. When the hall emptied and the pillars held only their own weight again, Stannis drew breath as if he had set down a pack. "It is like bailing a ship with a thimble," he said without bitterness. "It keeps a man honest," Ned said. "It keeps a man busy," Stannis replied. "Honesty will be tested at Harrenhal, not here." His gaze found Ned as if the hand were a mark on a sextant. "Send your last letters to Winterfell and to Riverrun. When Robb Stark crosses the neck with his small company, the war ceases to be a problem set and becomes a fact. Facts are easier to fight." "Sometimes," Ned said. He looked at the windows where the sky had gone to violet and then to slate. "Sometimes a fact is only a lie that survived the first blow. And sometimes," Stannis said, "a lie is only a fact that hasn't met me yet." The days after ran light-footed and heavy-booted both. The watch held. The queen wrote. The Red Woman's name began to creep like an ember in the dry straw of rumor. Men said she had eyes like coals and a dress that drank light. Ned paid the rumor its respect and no more. He watched Davos's boats inspect the river by night like beetles, their lanterns hooded, their oars in cloth, their men's teeth clenched lest they shine. In the guild cellars, jars came home like bad children returning to a hard mother, and Haleen stroked their bellies with cloths and told them stories in a thin voice and called them by names that had not been used aloud in 100 years. The hidden cache beneath the old hall by the river gate gave up 3 jars and a 4th that stuck. A man put a pry to it and the pry bit through the clay and the air went sweet all at once and Bywater was there as if he'd been born there, and the men froze not by orders but by some older thing. The jar did not split wholly. They bandaged it with clay and prayer. Later, when the men drank, one of them shook and did not say why, and his fellow did not ask. Catelyn reached Riverrun. The Tully banners hung limp in a windless dusk. The walls still held. Edmure met her in the yard with a bandaged shoulder and a smile a little too big, as if he could hold back the river of bad news by showing teeth. "Sister," he said, and hugged her as if to assure himself that something in the world still returned the pressure you put upon it. "Uncle Brynden is out with the archers along the bend. He has made itself into a nettle in Gregor's shirt. The Kingslayer sits in King's Landing like a cat before the hearth. Father tires. The fish swim. The river runs." He drew back and looked at her hard. "You look as if you just rode down the high road. Tell me you did not." "I did not fall," she said and laughed once. Because sometimes laughter is how one keeps from cutting one's own face with one's own teeth. "Has the king written?" "He has," Edmure said. His face turned a little rueful around the eyes. "He writes with a ruler in his hand, cat. Every line straight. It makes you feel like a boy who has tracked mud in the hall. He is a boy who learned to scrub floors," Catelyn said. "I will eat. I will see father. Then we will speak of how to make Tywin Lannister choke." Edmure grinned with relief he did not hide. "Gods, I love you," he said. At the wall, men looked into the dark and did not see the thing they feared, which is worse than seeing it. At Eastwatch, a gull fell dead out of the air, and the man who had been about to curse only crossed himself instead. At Castle Black, a boy called Samwell Tarly wrote in a stiff, careful hand to no one in particular, "Winter." He sanded the word. He looked at it again and thought it needs a verb, and could not find one that did not insult the thing the word meant. In King's Landing, as the 14th day of Stannis' reign bled into the 15th, the queen opened her window and looked toward the great September and the Red Keep as if she could make of her gaze a rope and pull both down upon the city. "Songs," she said to herself very quietly. "Songs will save us." She did not believe it. She had begun to realize there is no saving. There is only living. It is a knowledge some women come to with grace and some with blood. Cersei Lannister would come to it with wine. Stannis slept the hours he allowed himself and woke in the small stillness before dawn to the clamor of the city as it had been and as it would be. He put on his sword as other men put on their shame and he went to his work. Ned kissed his ring and thought, "The day is a wheel and men are spokes, and if we do not break, the wheel will carry us long enough to carry others." He went to his writing table and put his hand to the first paper of the morning. When he lifted the quill, it left a blot shaped like a thorn, and he thought of roses and of crowns and of what a man bleeds on when he is determined to make a world with fewer lies in it than he found. He wrote anyway. He would always write anyway, and when the sound came, the quick, urgent feet, Jory's voice at the door, the word that had become the city's bell, Riverrun, he stood, already moving, already knowing that the day had decided to stop being a day and to become a story. He stepped into the corridor where the light had just taken hold, and the smell of the sea had crept into the stone, and in that breath between steps, before orders became orders, he saw in his mind as clearly as if it had been a drawing on parchment the path ahead. The river, the red, the law, the winter, the girl with a wooden sword, the king with his unforgiving mouth, the queen with her letters like little knives, the ship that had slipped away with a child, the old man in white who would stand until he could not, the storm on the horizon, the old jars glimmering in darkness, patient, and the north quiet and iron, waiting to be asked for what it had always given without being asked. He did not speak to the vision. He walked through it and into the day. Jory had brought a rider in by the postern gate, a Riverland fellow whose leathers smelled of mud and smoke, and when the man bowed, his bones creaked like a ladder. "My lord Hand," he said, not trusting himself to look up until the words were out. "Lord Edmure holds Riverrun. The Lannister men have made their fires all about. Ser Amory Lorch sits on the south bank where the tumblestone slows for the ferry. The mountain rides the fords, swifter than we like. The blackfish makes pain where he may and comes back laughing like a knife. Lord Edmure bade me say he will hold a month if the gods do not laugh at him, and longer if they are pleased. He asks for law and men. Law he shall have today," Ned said, and the man's eyes flickered up in surprise, as if law were rarer than men. "Men, as we can spare." He went at once to the king. Stannis had a way of standing when he anticipated a blow that made even stone look likely to flinch sooner than he would. He listened without any change of breath. At the end he said, "We will not drink to this. We will put water on it." "What men?" Ned asked. "Not an army," Stannis said. "You know why." He moved a small onyx stag along the edge of the map to the place the rider had pointed with his smoke-stained nail. "We will not give Tywin the satisfaction of being able to say the city was left to the Queen's games while we paraded upon a field. We will not feed Renly's lies with our best horse. But we will send law that carries a sword." He looked up to a corner where the room made a shadow and where Varys invariably found reason to be. "Bring me Lord Beric Dondarrion," he said, "and the red priest who plays with fire for his supper." "Thuras," Varys murmured, delighted by the rightness of it. "He drinks too much to be a proper heretic." When Beric came, he came like a man who enjoyed the idea of riding out as much as the doing. He was no boy, though he was young, and there was something about his ease that made men like him when their better sense said they should not. He knelt briefly before the table, and when he rose his eyes were on the map, already greedy for the road. "Your Grace," he said. "You will carry my writ," Stannis said, uncurling a parchment already sanded. "You will go to the Trident and set the king's justice upon Ser Gregor Clegane and any man who burns for him. You will arrest him if you can. You will hang him if you must. If you cannot catch him, you will make it dear for him to ride." He laid another sheet atop the first. "And this to Lord Tywin Lannister. He is commanded to cease depredations or be declared outlaw. He smiles. He will smile less when his stewards find that men do not open their courts to him." Beric's mouth crooked. "Your Grace does not ask for songs." "I do not pay for them," Stannis said. "You will have men, 150 good. 20 Stormlanders who will not fear rain, 20 Riverlanders who will not mistake smoke for fog, and the rest of the city's better swords who have not yet forgotten which edge bites. Thuras will ride with you, if only to frighten superstitious fools who think a flaming sword can do more than a plain one." "I have frightened better men than fools," Thuras said cheerfully, appearing as if conjured, his close, cropped hair making his head look monkish until you saw the eyes. He smelled faintly of wine and not at all of shame. "I will set my sword alight, and their courage will burn before it does." "Do not set any part of the trident alight," Stannis said. "And if you pray, do it under your breath." Beric bowed again. "It will be done." Ned took him aside in the corridor after, as a man takes a young hound aside to say the thing he thinks it can understand. "Do not be a hero," he said. "Be a stone in the river. Let the water break itself upon you." Beric's grin flashed. "My lord hand," he said. "I try not to choose the names men give to the stones under their feet." He sobered at once. "But I will keep men breathing where I can. I am not so fond of songs as all that." Jory escorted them through the yards to where the company gathered. Thuras dipped his sword in pitch and the pitch in flame, and the men hooped because men do, and then Jory's voice cut through them like a clear bell naming the hour, and the fire went out, and they rode to the gate with only the sun upon their steel. Ser Barristan stood above at a crenel with his hands folded. He had wanted to go. Ned had seen it in the set of his jaw when Stannis changed his mind and said the Kingsguard would keep the king. The old knight saluted the departing with a small raise of his hand to the brow that could have been prayer, could have been blessing, could have been envy. Bywater stood at the gate with his iron hand on the chain. "Bring me back a story worth telling to men who think the watch is only cudgels," he said to Beric, and Beric laughed and promised nothing and promised everything in it. They were gone in a clatter that turned to dull thunder and then to memory. Ned breathed out and felt the city close around the absence as water closes when a boat has cut it. Afterward, he and Stannis heard a dozen petitions and signed 5 orders and said no to 3 requests for old privileges made by men who had forgotten that new kings brought new weights. The sun wrung itself out upon the bay and left the stones hot to the palm. When night came, it came with a sky like hammered tin and no stars. Davos returned to the harbor and went out again with a lantern shaded in thick cloth, his oarsman's strokes barely dents in the river's skin. Varys's birds sang that the queen had had a chest carried down into Maegor's holdfast by 6 men sweating and 1 woman smiling. Halene's assistants came to Ned with faces damp and earnest to say another 3 jars had been coaxed from a cellar that had forgotten it had a door. On the 2nd day, Beric's company reached the Trident, and the river gave them its smell, which is part iron, part old fish, part something else that is simply river. They found a hamlet no more than a handful of wattle huts smoldering around a well, and put the embers out with shovels and with the backs of their own throats, and left grain wrapped in oiled cloth in a barn that had no door any longer. 3 boys watched them with eyes too large, and ran only when Thuras lit his sword for a moment, and hooped because the boys had made him feel like a performer instead of a priest. At night they heard horses and heeled from the road into a stand of alder, and the men who passed had the look of Lorch's rats. Thin, quick, vicious in packs, more dangerous in retreat than advance. Beric let them go the first night and rode them down the second when they had put a torch to a rick for nothing but the vanity of flame. He made them show him the mark under their jerkin collars, the little lion stitched there in yellow silk, and when he hanged too, he did it after he read them the words that made it law. Men die differently when they know the shape of their gallows in words. The Mummer's Ford was where the road to Derry fell toward the river in a gentle slope that lied about the strength of the current. Thuras had doused his sword by then. The men had seen what flame could do to hearts and had learned what water did to it in turn. They forded in 2s, each pair with arms like rope for the other. The far bank was quiet as a conspirator and, for that reason, wrong. They found out why a moment later. The reeds shook not like reeds but like breath, and out of them came men thick and sudden, the horses' chests low, the spear points higher. Gregor Clegane was not among them. Beric saw it in the first glance and made the metal decision that men who live through such moments make. Without the mountain they were less mountain, and so this would be a fight and not a story to be told around boards with mugs on them. He sang out, and the men who loved him sang back and did what men do who have trained together for 3 days and known each other's fathers for 1. The first clash was a sound like someone breaking epitaphs in an old graveyard. Thuras's sword flamed once out of sheer habit and then was no more use than the next man's. A Stormlander with a broken nose took a spear that should have been Beric's and went to his knees with a grunt like embarrassment. Beric hauled him up and shoved him toward the river and was rewarded by a blade that took him a glancing kiss across the ribs, hot as a lick of red iron. The Lannister line bent and then stiffened. Not bravery. The kind of discipline men learn when they have been hit before and had it beaten out of them to run. A man in half-plate with a lion on his breast shouted and poked with his sword like a man trying to skewer an eel, and Beric cut him in the soft of his inner thigh and let him slide off the steel and into the shallows, where he threshed like the eel he tried to catch. Then a horse crashed into him from the flank, not because its rider had any cunning. Indeed, the rider hung like a bag of wet grain, but because chaos has its own aim. Beric went to the water, his mouth full of the river as if it meant to baptize him in its own name. He tried to rise and the current said no, hard. He felt hands, and then he felt nothing, and then he felt something else, which was fire without heat, a name without breath. A tug as if someone who loved him had decided not to let him go after all, whether he liked it or not. He woke on the bank with Thuras crawling like a crab and cursing in 3 tongues. His hands red to the wrists and his eyes like lamps that had seen too much. "You fool," Thuras said, and if tears made the red man's beard shine, it might have been the river. "What did you do?" Beric croaked. He felt the hole in his chest and then did not. He felt the world come back and sit upon him like a heavy dog who thinks itself a pup. "I prayed," Thuras said, bewildered by the answer as much as by the result. "And the god I had sold tricks in his name for years decided to play one on me." He made a sound that was not a laugh and not a sob but a man's surprise at himself. "Get up. If you have the decency to be alive, at least have the decency to look like it." The fight had ended the way fights end when neither side wants to count the dead too closely. The Lannister men melted back into the reeds when they understood these were not farmers with spears but men with work to do, and Beric's company stood panting and bled on and searched the dead for names and found none worth keeping, only workmanlike wetness. They set 2 bodies in the river because the ground would not take a spade and the men could not take the work, and the water told them it would carry those boys somewhere, and for the moment that had to be enough. News of Mummer's Ford traveled faster than the riders who carried it. By the time a mud-splashed messenger brought Thuras's astonished account to King's Landing, Varys already had 3 versions, one of which had Beric sprout wings and fly from the river like a gull, which no one believed but many wanted to, and another which said the Red Priest had poured wildfire into the corpse's mouth, which Haleen denied with offended pride for his craft. Ned read the plainest account and felt something cold that was not fear and not relief move along his spine, the way winter wind does when it remembers where you live. He carried the news to Stannis. The king heard it with a jaw that tightened until the hinge under the ear stood like a white pebble. "We do not govern by magic," he said, not as a command but as if reminding the room what language it spoke. "If a man lives who should by all reckonings be dead, I will not waste him. But I will not hold him up to the realm as a trick to make boys cheer." "Thuras has set swords alight for a laugh at tourneys for 20 years, Ned said. "If his god has decided to make a mock of him at last, I will not complain if it saves my men. But I will not have wildfire and red flame confused in the dark." Stannis nodded curtly. "Good. See that it is so." He let out a breath that might have been the smallest of the day, and when he took the next, it was ready for the next task. "Riverrun." "Still holding," Ned said. "Catelyn is within. The blackfish harasses the seagers like a gadfly with a pike. Edmure boasts and bleeds both. Send this," Stannis said, and slid across the table a letter already answered before it had been read. To Lord Hoster, words of respect and of law. To Edmure, words that would shame him into behaving if shame could touch him. Tell them to hold the line of the Red Fork. They need not win. They need not lose. He returned his gaze to the map and to the south, where rumor had taken form. "Renly marches with flowers in his hair," he said. "They will wilt by Blackwater if they reach it. Better he stays in the Mander and waters them with songs." His mouth thinned further. "And Dorne?" Doran Martell answers with the speed of a man who does not move his foot if he is not sure of the ground, Varys said smoothly. "He writes in a gentleman's hand to say the princess is safe and will remain a guest until such time as the crown sends for her with gentler promises than chains. He suggests that betrothal to his Trystane would do the realm more good than harm. He says this as a father, and also as a prince who has watched how quickly kings forget who bleeds. Stannis made a sound like iron. He asks for coin before he spends honor. Typical. We will not barter law for friendship, but we will not make an enemy of a patient snake until we must. He took up a quill. I will write him with my own hand. He will see that I do not beg. He will see that I will not threaten. I will do neither with Dorne. They like to think themselves outside the weather. We will let them keep the illusion while winter is far. In Sunspear, the letter was put into Prince Doran's hand by Ariohota, who heard without interest the way the sea spoke beyond the garden and the way the wind breathed, as if finding out if this castle would be worth knowing. Doran read with his lower lip tucked between his teeth, as he did when he wished the body would not complain while the mind worked. A plain man, he murmured to Arianne, who stood with a patience she had learned late and wore like a jewel. He will not dance to our pipes. He will not threaten us, and he will not plead. He will remember us when others would forget. We will keep the princess a guest until we know whether keeping her makes the world better for us or worse. Will we send flour? Arianne asked, glancing toward the room where Myrcella's laughter had begun to ring, as if it had found something to catch on. The sound startled her, as if she had summoned it by naming it. We will send dates, Doran said. They keep better. We will send the word patience. He looked down at his gout-swollen foot and then passed it to the long, thin map of a realm that liked to forget how narrow some of its parts were. We will wait. At Highgarden, where scent is a kind of politics, Renly Baratheon held court under an arbor with sunlight laid across his hair like a coronation. He looked every inch a king to men who liked their kings to please their eyes as well as their laws, and Mace Tyrell watched him with a father's satisfaction and a farmer's anxiety. Things had been planted. They would need weather and time. My lord, Renly said to Garland and Loras both, each on a different side like the two ends of a bow. Stannis has put a crown on himself and a law in his mouth. I do not begrudge him either. A man should have some solace in old age. Younger than our father, Garland said, mild and smiling, which was his favorite way to drop a stone into a pond. Then I do not begrudge him that our father is older, Renly said, recovering at once. We march to Storm's End. It is time that Castle remembered the name of the man who should hold it. He lifted his cup as if it were a little crown and drank. And then, we will decide whether the king in King's Landing wears his iron by right or by habit. Mace Tyrell's fingers found their way to his chain of office, which pleased him as much as good bread does a poor man. The roads to King's Landing are good when the crown pays for them, he said. They are poor when war walks them. We must not mistake a map for a road. Loras smiled as if men had said something witty. Maps are made by men who have never ridden past a hedge, he said. We will show them where the roads are. You will show them where the roads are if the king lets you, Olenna Redwine said from the shade. Not invited and not needing invitation. You boys and your roses. They smell sweet and then they turn brown and then you pretend you like their scent better that way. She sniffed. Baratheons. Always making noise and thinking noise is news. Renly laughed and bent to kiss her knuckles. Grandmother, he said. Noise is how one keeps men from listening too closely to their own fears. He straightened. We will keep them busy, then we will be kind. The realm desires kindness more than it desires justice, and it desires appearance more than it desires either. We will give all three in the measure that gets us what we want. In Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister read the same reports that reached Stannis. Only his were written in different hands and were attended by different men. He put weight on them by looking at them. The boy Robb Stark marches, he said. He has made a Frey open his gates for promise of marriage because Freys are always Freys. Good. Promises make clever men stupid and stupid men brave. Kevin's brow furrowed. We have always said it was folly to ignore the twins. It is always folly to ignore bridges, Tywin said, particularly those owned by petty men. We will lay a table for the wolves. We will let them choose which knife they lay their necks upon. He looked to a map on which a half-dozen lines in red hinted at possibilities that had not yet occurred. Stannis sends letters and not men. He was always cautious when a blow would have served. The boy in the Reach wears flowers. Flowers bruise. We will take what is ripe. Sir Jaime? Kevin asked carefully. My son is a sword, Tywin said, as if naming an object. A good one, ill-suited to whittling when a hammer would serve. He did not add. And there is no work for him while he sits in a castle with a woman who thinks herself the hammer. He will stay where he is until the city is the city again, or until the city is ripe to be cut. Jaime Lannister, in that city, sat with a whetstone and his sword across his knees, as if he had heard his father at a distance and decided not to be offended. The sound of steel on stone was comforting for its honesty. He drew the edge gently and thought of a debt owed to a life he had not chosen and had chosen both. He thought of the Mad King's ashes under the throne and of fire and of men who made themselves into things fire likes to eat. He thought of Stannis' hard mouth and of Ned Stark's stupid, beautiful insistence on a world that rarely presented itself in straight lines. He heard the footfall behind him not as a soldier hears it but as a man accustomed to being approached without fear, brisk, ordinary, without the softness of a man who would creep. Ser Mandon Moore stood not far, his face the bland of snow. Sir, he said.
Sir, Jaime replied.
The queen begs a word, Mandon said. She says the day is long and flows around her like a flood. She would like a rock. Tell the queen, Jaime said lazily, that I have never been a rock, only the sea. I will come. He set the stone aside and rose in one motion, and as he did he felt the weight of the day gather in his joints, not pain. Jaime had little acquaintance with that ONL. Why the knowledge that if a man is a sword, he would prefer to be used or cleaned or set in oil, not left on a shelf to rust in his own thoughts. In White Harbor, Lord Wyman Manderley sat in his chair like a mountain that had politely decided to attend court for a time. The royal writ with Stannis' name lay open on his knee. He pays, Wyman said, approving of that more than of any other quality. He pays honest. He pays prompt. He pays for grain and not for songs. The crowns have loved songs. Songs fill men and not bellies. He asks for ships to Eastwatch, his son Wylis said, the belt straining as he leaned to see the script. He asks for salt beef and for oats. He asks for men to stand in the cold, Wyman said. He asks for the North to remember it is the North. He made a satisfied noise deep in his throat. I like a king who remembers what he is not. Send the ships. Send the grain. If the wall holds, our trade holds, and if it falls, our lives will be shorter than the time it takes to count the coin we will not have time to spend. He signed with a flourish and his oath as a man of the Manderley name, which is to say he did not sing it. He ate after. At the wall, Jeor Mormont read the letters that had been sent and felt for once like a man who had shouted down a well and heard the echo return not empty. Stannis, he said to Maester Aemon, has a spine. I do not care if he has a heart. Spines carry men. Hearts get them killed. Aemon smiled without showing teeth. He has both, he said, though he could not see the map he folded. He only likes one better. There is little harm in that. There is harm in the other way. Mormont grunted. Sam, he cried, and the boy lumbered in, ink-stained and earnest. Send that raven to White Harbor again and thank the fat lord for his fat kindness. And write to Lord Stark and tell him we'll count coin with fingers and men with hearts until the snows tell us otherwise. Sam nodded, tongue between his teeth as he composed the words in his head. He had begun to learn that writing to kings was only writing, once you forgot the crown. In King's Landing, the city settled into the likeness of a place ruled. It did not happen by magic. It happened in the way cartwheels creaked a little less when a man oiled them, and the way women in the Street of Silk said they would be closed for 2 hours in the afternoon on the King's petition days because less trouble came out of doors then. It happened in the way bakers stopped arguing with cudgels and began putting their prices up on boards and pointing to them when men shouted. It happened in the way a lantern mended on the fish market stayed mended 2 days longer than it would have. This is not to say there was peace. There were knives. There were letters. There was one morning when a dead man was found at the foot of the hook with his throat cut and a lion brooch fastened to his cloak with pig's grease, meant to stain, and Bywater made a point of washing the brooch in front of the crowd and pinning it clean to the dead man's chest before they carried him away. "A man's mark should not be dirt by a liar's hand," he said, and men nodded because they understood the grammar of that act even if they did not understand the words. There was one evening when a fire started in a cellar off the Street of Sisters, and for a heartbeat the wrong sweetness filled the air, and Haleen ran as if his years were a cloak he had been told to cast aside. And the gold cloaks brought sand, and the alchemists brought their thin skill, and the flames went a sullen green for one hateful instant, and then went brown and then went out. Ned stood at the mouth of the alley and watched ash settle like a curse and thought of the jar's patient bellies under the city, and of men who would use fire to save themselves when all it will do is make a funeral of their neighbors. Afterward he went to Stannis without making him wait. "There are men moving jars without writ," he said. "Some wear the guild's belts. Some wear none. It is the Queen's people. They test the doors and the chains." "They will not test them long," Stannis said. "Double the watch on the guild houses. Haleen will account for every sealed jar by nightfall. If he cannot, he will be dragged to the steps of the sept and made to read the list of his failures until he has learned it. The Queen thinks to make of wildfire a tamed one. It will not be tamed." He paused. "There is another thing. A letter from Robb Stark." Ned reached for it with the way his hand had been made to reach for swords. He read the neat words, and his mouth went dry with a father's pride and sorrow. Robb had crossed at the twins and left a charm behind in the form of a promise made to Lord Walder's brood. He had gone light and he had moved fast, and he had put Lord Bolton where he could do the least harm and the most work, which is the kindest thing to do with Roose Bolton. He was riding toward the Green Fork to keep the West separated from itself by keeping its rivers between its hands. "He is not foolish," Stannis said, and that was more praise than most men got from him in a year. "He is not his father yet," Ned said, and found he could say the words without bitterness. "A son should not be a father too soon. But he will keep his men warm and his council warmer." "Good," Stannis said. "If he wins, it is to the law's credit. If he loses, it is to the law's cost. The law is more important." He lifted his gaze. "I will go to the steps of the sept tomorrow and say that the law protects those who obey it. The city must hear it again. The city's memory is shorter than its streets." "And if the Queen goes to her windows and laughs?" Ned asked. Stannis's mouth did not soften, but his eyes changed in a way that would have been a smile in another man. "She will chip a tooth," he said, which was the closest thing to humor Ned had yet heard of him. They parted with work in their hands and thought in their mouths, and if there was a moment later, when Ned stood alone in his chamber and looked toward the north and felt the pull of it like a tide he had forgotten to account for, and if, in that moment, he laid his hand flat on the table and said aloud the names of his children in the order they had been born, no one but the stone heard it. Catelyn stood on Riverrun's walls beside Brynden Tully and watched men set stakes in the shallows and send boats along the bend with small lanterns hooded like secrets. And when she spoke, it was with the voice of a woman who has scraped her heart across stone and found it still useful. "There is to be a storm," she said, though the sky was clear. "I can feel it. The world is made of storms now," the Blackfish said, his mouth quirking. "There is no use in waiting for clear weather to ride. The boy is near the twins. He smells like a soldier already. Robb is not a soul." "He is," Brynden said gently, and did not let her lie to herself for longer than one heartbeat. "He will be a better one if we give him time and grief in the right amounts. If we deny him either, he will take both where he should not." He pointed with his chin to the west, where fires licked the horizon as if men had drawn a necklace there. "Tywin sits like a spider and eats what comes near. He will send one of his hands east to feel our belly. The other hand he will keep to Swat. We will make a fist under his fingers." "Has father eaten?" Catelyn asked abruptly, because sometimes the small kindnesses are the only ones one can give. "Has Edmure slept?" "No and no," Brynden said. His eyes gentled. "You can do one of those two things. Choose the one that yields more peace in the morning and less pride at the time. The second choice is the one you are used to. I would suggest the first for once." She laughed despite herself. "You are tiresome," she said. "I am old," he said. It is a cousin's disease. We become like fathers men did not ask for. We do it anyway. At dawn there were arrows in bundles where they had been in handfuls before, and a dozen quivers that had been counted twice were counted again. Men said the king's name in whispers as if saying it aloud might invite attention or luck. A raven came and brought them words in Stannis's hand that had no sweet in them but enough salt to keep them honest. Hold, do not chase, do not be lured, do not be bait. Brynden read and snorted and said, "He writes as I fight." And Catelyn thought that if she had been a different woman she might have smiled at a stranger's grim comfort. On the road to the Green Fork, Robb Stark rode the chestnut gelding that had been broken for him at 14 and had never embarrassed him. The Great John roared at his side and sometimes ahead and sometimes behind, a weather of his own. Roose Bolton slid like a shadow where the sun could not find purchase. Theon laughed too loudly at things that were not funny. Robb's face did not alter when men told him stories. It altered only when he watched the ground. At night he walked the lines and spoke to men of Winterfell and to men who would never see it but had heard the word and had assigned it a warmth. He took counsel and he gave it back. He slept the kind of sleep one learns on campaign. Hard, shallow, full of the taste of leather. He dreamed once, briefly, of a boy on a wall in the cold, and woke with his heart like a bird. He set his hands and he rode. In King's Landing, men had begun to get used to the steadiness. It is like a song. Once a city learns the tune, it can hum it while doing other things. This made the queen angrier than 1,000 insults would have. She heard the music and thought, "That is not mine." She sent for Pycelle. She promised him kisses of praise and told him she would have the king's seal off his hand if he would not stop acting like a bellows and start acting like a man. She sent for Jaime and told him the story of a boy who had laughed at lion cubs. She sent for Tommen and told him a story that made him cry and then told him he was a baby for doing so and then wept herself and blamed the wine. She sent for Varys and told him that if he did not tell her when the king was to be alone she would find out anyway, and it would be worse for everyone. Varys told Ned. "She will put her hand upon something you did not know was yours and squeeze," he said. "She will select a time when your guard blinks not out of weariness but out of habit and call it cunning. Then we will do not the expected thing and not the dramatic thing," Ned said. "We will do the dull thing. We will put a man at my elbow who does not blink." "That man is Ser Barristan," Varys said. "And he cannot be at your elbow and the king's both." "Then it will be Tomard," Ned said. "He blinks only to say he is awake." They crossed the yard between them without speaking. The sky above the bay had smudged blue to old wool. Gulls squabbled about nothing that mattered. The Iron Throne sat in its chamber like a threat one had learned to love. Haleen took short steps in the gallery, as if counting for comfort. In the armory, a boy filed a burr off a sword with his tongue between his teeth. The day went on. It did what days do. It spent itself. It bought justice a little more time. It bought men small meals and smaller mercies. It bought a girl with a wooden sword an hour with a man who would leave her better or worse, and in this case better, because Syrio was made of the conviction that the world is turned by feet as much as by hands. It bought a boy in a fine calendar of velvet a moment where he did not want to be king and therefore forgot he had been told he was. It bought a king an hour at a table with fruit and a map and a man who would not lie to him even if it would make everything easier. And in the evening, when the bells marked the hour with that heavy assurance that bells have when they think themselves important, a rider came from the west, lean as a wasp, his horse gasping, his face a parchment pulled too tight. "My lord Hand," he said in the yard where men had stilled. "The lions are moving. Lord Tywin has sent a claw east. Ser Adam Marbrand, they say, with fast horse and men who like their work. Edmure says he will not dance. He says to tell you he will make a wall with his own body if he must. Tell him to build with other men's," Ned said at once, because that was the kindness buried in the hardness. A lord's body yields less ground now and more trouble later than 100 poorer ones. "Tell him we are coming in the only way that helps, with the law first and steel if we must." The rider swayed. "There is more," he said, as if he had been holding the worst in case saying it made it true. They say Jaime Lannister rides out in the night to Rosby or to Duskendale.
No Banner. No Council.
Jaime does nothing without a mirror, Ser Barristan said, appearing as if he had been asked for. If he rides, it is because he wishes someone to watch him. He will shake the tree and see what fruit falls. Then we will not be fruit, Stannis said, and the manner of his saying told the men around him why he was king. He turned on his heel. Lord Stark, we ride at dawn with 50 men. We will not leave the city's bones exposed. But we will not allow that man to cut strips off our law and call it jerky. He glanced once toward Maegor's Holdfast, that toy island with its drawbridge a smile without humor. The queen will not be able to help herself. She will test what we leave. Varys, set your spiders. Bywater, set your traps. Ser Barristan, put a white cloak at every door tells men the king passes. If we return to a city on fire, I will have the men responsible broken on their own thresholds. And if we return to a city that has minded itself? Ned asked. Stannis's mouth did that almost smile again. Then we will have proved a king can leave a room without the furniture stealing itself, he said. And that will be a lesson worth the ride. Night pressed close. Somewhere in the city, under stone and under breath and under men's thoughts, a jar dreamed of green. In Riverrun, Catelyn kissed her father's hand and told him a story about a boy who had laughed once when he saw snow. In the Reach, Renly listened to a nightingale and believed it sang for him. In Dorne, Myrcella pressed her face to the lattice and smelled the sea and did not cry because she had decided that she was brave now and brave girls do not. In the north, on a road where the ruts were honest and the sky was clearer than any southern heart, Robb Stark bedded down with a map under his head and a sword by his hand and dreamed of wolves that did not show him whether they ran ahead or behind, only that they ran. Dawn came like new coin through a miser's fingers. The king and the hand went out under it with their chosen men, and the people who watched them pass had the look people have when they see two shapes that are not exactly what they expected and decide they are perhaps what they needed instead. They wore no cloth of gold. They wore mail under plain surcoats and had on their faces not the hungry brightness of men who ride for fame, but the contained hardness of men who ride for work. Ned felt the rhythm begin, the deep horsebody beat that a man's bones learn if he lets them, and with it came the thinking that comes to a rider on the first hours of the road, when the city is still only a smell behind him and the fields ahead have begun to accept his weight. He thought of a seat of iron and of a law written in a hand even when one's wrist is tired. He thought of a woman in a castle on a river who had never forgiven him for living when a girl had died and who loved him better for that. He thought of a boy and then of another boy and then of a girl and then of a girl and then of a boy who was not his blood and yet who had been given his name and his bread and his wall. He did not look back. He did not need to. He rode forward into a morning that promised neither mercy nor triumph and both in their time, and the men around him set their mouths and did not speak, because speech breaks when the road climbs and one must save breath for the hill. They reached Rosby by noon of the next day, a small town that had decided to be poorer in exchange for living longer. Jaime Lannister was not there, because Jaime was not a man to be found where men could count his sins at leisure. They rode on. At Duskendale the docks told of a ship that had offered too much coin for too little cargo and had sailed with the tide and a man with sunshine hair at the stern. And Stannis's knuckles whitened on the pommel and he said nothing, and that was how men knew they should speak even less than they had. On the Blackwater's right bank, above the place where the river widened and the city's stink returned like an unloved cousin, Stannis called a halt in a fold of ground in which a small company could make no more of a trap than a child makes an ocean with a tub. He looked toward the city and toward the road and then at Ned. "We will not catch him," he said. "He is not a fish that likes nets." "We do not need to," Ned said. "We only need to let him exhaust his horse and his charm both. Men will not open gates forever to a man with a smile and no banner." Stannis nodded once, and in that nod Ned felt the recognition of one blunt truth by another. "We ride back," the king said. "We ride back because the city will have learned something while we were gone. If it has learned nothing, we will teach it. If it has learned the wrong lesson, we will teach it harder." They turned. The sun had found its afternoon harshness. Dust rose from the horses' hooves in little ghosts that kept pace for a time and then fell away. When the walls of King's Landing took shape again, Ned felt the weight of them less than he had feared and more than he had hoped. At the gate, Bywater met them, his iron hand greasy with some ordinary repair, which boded well. "No fires," he said, with the dry humor of a man still surprised by good news.
No riots.
A baker had his stall kicked. I had the man pay for another's flour out of his own stock. He did not like the taste of it. He will not kick again. "And the Queen?" Stannis asked. Bywater shrugged without insolence. "She had the drawbridge lowered and raised again. She had a chest carried out and carried back in again. She had a man flogged for walking too loudly under her window. She had a song played. She had a song stopped. She lets the day know that she is still here." "She is," Stannis said. "So is the law." He dismounted without waiting for help, which was not kingly and therefore exactly right. Ned put his hand on the warm leather of the pommel a long breath longer than necessary. A gull called. Somewhere in the keep Arya laughed. He did not hear it, but the memory of the sound came to him as some men's gods come when they are not called. He swung his leg over and dropped onto the stones of a city that had not burned that day, and thought, "One day at a time is how a throne is held, and a life too." Then he went to the hall to begin, again, to turn the day into law.